This is the DRS train.
Well, it's not quite that wannabe Eurovision entry from last year's race, but it'll do. I'm Peter Brook. I'm joined by the Casual F1 fan and Nedzo's F1 Grid Box, and you're listening to the DRS Train podcast. So, Belgium, I don't know about you two, but even though I don't smoke, I felt like I needed a cigarette after that. I mean, I thought that was fantastic.
Oh yeah, I think the best part for me was I think it has happened to me in the last 3-4 races where I thought this is the best race of the season, and this was I think the third or fourth race in a row where I just sat down and I said this is the best race of the season. I mean, keeping the social media meltdown aside, that was so much fun. I think it gave me a bit of 2021 vibes where somehow somewhere the ending of the races were fun, even though the race was a bit of a drag in some ways in between. Every time, whenever it came to the end, it kind of peaked, and that's something that I actually loved about it.
Yeah, it feels kind of like 2012. Obviously, the first season I watched F1, we've had 7 winners now, and it was 8 in 2012. We're going to hopefully get another one by the end of the year if Perez can gear up, which he won't be able to do actually. Never mind. But yeah, it's been a really exciting, and yeah, it's constantly improving and getting better and better. I like it.
Yeah, I mean, the main thing I enjoyed now is that because the teams are so close together, we saw just everyone pushing all the time. There was little to no tyre saving from anyone. Ironically, from our, premature winner, George Russell, was probably the only one. So I think we should start, probably with Mercedes. Somewhat unexpected, almost 1-2 at the end of that. I mean, they had qualifying, they were there or thereabouts. George was kind of a non-entity until he suddenly made this decision to do this one stop. And it's just such a shame that it results in a disqualification, partly because he drove amazingly and it was just really impressive, but also you can add this to the wins that Lewis got that doesn't deserve as well.
Yeah, I think the best part about the entire race, and maybe when it comes to George, something that I think we've even discussed this in the past as well, that when it came to crunch moments, he's somewhat crumbled whenever he's tried to go for that big prize or things like that. It happened in Singapore last season. It has happened a few times where he's made the mistake. And I mean, again, as I said, the social media discourse aside, there was one thing that everyone keeps forgetting. The last three, I think there were, I think, 4 or 5 laps that Lewis had where he could have had a run on him. In the last 2 laps, it was Lewis who made a slight mistake out of turn one, where he kind of either outbraked himself or lost traction, and that helped George keep that position. Ideally, what we've seen from George is that he crumbles under pressure. This was one race where let's be honest, he went against what his team wanted him to do. If you remember, there was a team radio where they actually said, just to confirm, you want to go through with this? And he said, yeah, I'm doing this. And he backed himself and he won the race. I mean, keeping aside the disqualification or whatever supposed gain there is from 1.5 kgs, we don't even know when that 1.5 kg left the car and stuff like this. So overall, I think this race cements something that I firmly believed, but maybe a lot of people have not. George belongs in the category of the elite drivers in Formula One. Him, Lewis, Max, Charles. I'll put Lando in it, others won't. Maybe to an extent, Oscar. These are your top 6, 7 drivers who are in terms of at least talent, maybe not in terms of application, but they are right at the top.
I think I'd say that the only thing he properly needs to work on is his racecraft, because the tag of Osama bin Russell has been somewhat true over the past few years. He's got these Hail Mary moments, which I do like, because I think especially now Lewis is older, he's a lot more unhinged than Lewis is. He goes for the things that other people don't, and sometimes it doesn't work out, and we've seen how it doesn't work out before, but some of the time it does, and that, I think, adds to the entertainment. I think Lewis is just so conservative nowadays. I think that's why partially he didn't go for the move the first time he tried to overtake, and the previous two times when he did try and push, it was just too much. Like, don't push into last horse. Try and get a better exit out of last horse, and you get a better run up the hill. That's where it should be. And yeah, it's just I think. Yeah, Lewis just needs to gear up. But yeah, George did a great job, even if he was underweight.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen elements of him being a tyre whisperer before this. I mean, in Monaco this year, he did 75 laps, wasn't it, on softs or something, or mediums? It was something ridiculous, and everyone else was doing the same length on hards, and he was more or less keeping the pace. Like, he's somebody who he is very good actually at thinking on the fly, and you see this all the time. He's always questioning the team, and he's always making suggestions of what we should do, even if a lot of the time it's wrong, because he's very good at, forecasting podiums and results without ever actually checking the weather forecast a lot of the time. But like he doesn't have this passive take that Lewis has and what his future teammate Charles Leclerc has, where they basically listen to whatever the team tells them and just kind of go along with that. And that's really what's going on here, because certain people, they're accusing once again of sabotage because they never gave Lewis that option of a one stop. And it's like, well, they never gave that option to George either. He was the one who said, I want to do a one stop. And so let's go for it. Lewis was happy to do it too, because that was basically everyone else was doing.
I think, that's where... Yeah, go ahead.
I think it's just typical Team LH thinking that Lewis is the greatest messiah of all time, and that anyone who disrespects him should be projected into the sun, which I think is utterly retarded. But I mean, obviously Lewis was there. He was very much in the ballpark to win, and although he bottled it a couple of times, it's of all the so-called undeserved wins he's had, it's one of the more deserved ones, because he was there, he was in the ballpark, and even if he had the less optimal strategy, especially in terms of track position, I think he did. I think of all the ones that he supposedly didn't deserve, this is one of the better ones, because he was second by less than a second.
Yeah, I don't think it was an suboptimal strategy. Ideally, that was the strategy one should be on, the two-stopper, because let's be honest, if you're leading the race and the guys that are behind you, they are stopping for an undercut, you don't let them gain an advantage of a fresher tire and you try to stay out and gamble on a single stop. You just don't do that. It does not make any sense. George did that because otherwise he was going to finish P5. It was a gamble. He drove in an excellent manner, but I don't think we should lose one very simple fact, that is, out of the first 10 finishers, only 2 drivers did that, a single stopper, Fernando Alonso and a George Russell. Well, both of them are very close friends, so maybe something they might have figured out earlier. But it does show that ideally the optimum strategy was the two stopper. And look, if Lewis had nailed the overtake on George, if he had got things right, I think that one of the reasons why maybe Lewis didn't really try something outrageous was because George was his teammate. So he maybe played the team game a bit. But overall, I think I won't say that it was a case of George getting a preferred strategy. It was a case of George throwing a Hail Mary and using his talent to justify taking a decision like this more than anything else.
I'm not convinced that a one-stop would have worked for Lewis as well, even though he had track advantage, on the basis that on his 2 attempts to pass George, he locked up both times going into last source and then messed up his run to Eau Rouge. I mean, it was kind of astonishing to me that he didn't, first of all, catch him faster, but also then pass him as well, because George's tyres are, 15 laps older?
Yeah.
it should have been a done deal. And the whole time he was doing this, Piastri was catching him at a rate of knots as well. And yes, Piastri was on younger tires, but still, it's like, how did he had a good 5 laps, a 5-lap window in which to pass him, and just didn't, having pulled off 2 very convincing and very easy moves right at the start of the race on Checo and Leclerc. But
Yeah.
the
Sorry,
strategy was fine. I mean, the thing is, he was helped because it was the go-to strategy, the 2-stop, which everyone else did. And the team did it properly because both his pit stops were very tidy, whereas Leclerc and Piastri, they attempted undercuts and then had really slow stops both times, which undid it. And so there was nothing wrong with his strategy. It's just that, yeah, George tried to think outside of the box and made it work. It's just that the argument people made, because he was 1.5 kilos underweight, they'll say, well, that's about 2 seconds over a whole race distance. And it's like, oh, well, Lewis was less than a second behind. It's like, you need to factor in, he needs to still pass him. That's the thing. And Lewis just kept locking up each time. Like, I don't think if he'd been within the weight limit, I think he still would have won. It wouldn't have made enough of a difference. Yeah.
That whole, you mentioning that Piastri pit stop, I completely forgot about the Piastri going long on his pit stop because of all the stuff that happened after it. I think that, considering that he caught up basically on the final lap, the 2 seconds that he lost from that, considering how much he was gaining, I think he could have caught up to them with 3 or 2 laps to go and gone straight past Lewis and possibly straight past George on the next lap. Like, Piastri could have won this race if it wasn't for that dodgy pit stop, and I think his performance was kind of underlooked because of how good George's was on those tyres. I think Piastri really, considering where Norris was, I think he really pulled his finger out and got in clean air and did the stuff that Norris can't.
Yeah, there's completely agreed on that. I think one of the big things that actually a lot of people really didn't really pay attention to was one of the reasons why Lewis qualified as high as he did and George did not. And then how the race panned out and the battle between the two was the fact that George and Lewis, they diverged when it came to setups. Lewis was more on a higher downforce setup compared to George. At the end of the straight, there was around 5 to 6 kilometers difference between the two. In the wets, Lewis had a top speed of around 314, 15, and George had around 320, 321, something like that. And while that helped Lewis in out qualifying George and basically starting ahead, when it came to pulling off the overtake, that's where he struggled a lot. And even when you look at the time when Lewis was trying to catch up with George, the first and the third sector was not where Lewis was actually making up time. It was the second sector. He would make up around 7 to 8 tenths in that particular sector. And that's where ultimately he didn't, maybe to an extent it played a role that the kind of setup that the two drivers had, George felt that he could fend him off. And you could see the place where George was losing time was the middle sector. And once Lewis caught up with him, there was no loss of time in that particular sector. And then it came down to the long DRS straight and then just the start finish straight. And if those were the two areas where George was able to nail it, he tended to keep Lewis behind him. And I think that's why the whole thing played out the way it did.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting because people were, Lewis, he won driver of the day at the end of it, and people were saying, how did George not get it? But then the vote came in, or the vote started coming in long before everyone realized, oh, actually, George isn't pitting again. And I think the assumption was he's going to fall back and probably finish third. That was the thing. I think genuinely nobody expected he would hold out enough to win, to sort of win at the end. To do this because of how much faster Lewis was catching him in the final stint. But it means that after the race, Lewis was not happy. I mean, he did his media duties and he was clearly not very pleased with what was going on. And he ended up leaving the circuit almost immediately after all of that was done. So I think he was probably on the plane back to Monaco when he found out how you've actually won the race.
Yeah, but going back to Casual's point about the downforce settings, that's really interesting. I've just so if George was on a lower downforce setup and he managed to save tyres better than Lewis did, that's because obviously lower downforce means more sliding, less grip, and less ability to conserve through the corner. That's really interesting how George has managed to. Obviously, Lewis wasn't ever thinking of a one stop, so he wouldn't have conserved as much as George. But the fact that George has managed to conserve more than Lewis, that's really interesting, in my opinion.
It is, yeah. Again, we don't know if both. Ultimately, we don't even know how much Lewis pushed on the second stint, cause again, he was always destined to pit again, and he even said that he had enough tire left. But again, that's Lewis being Lewis. And honestly, again, I wrote a whole thing on Twitter regarding this, that it's actually funny that the week started with Lewis lecturing Max on how to be a world champion, being a team player, being a team leader, and whatever. And then on the very, I think just 2 days later, he pretty much threw the team under the bus, said that I wanted to do a single stop, said that I had tires left, and you if you can't even stick to what you're trying to preach, I mean, what's the point of the whole thing? But again, it's Lewis. Doesn't change, right?
Lewis talking about being a team leader when he couldn't always beat Jenson Button, couldn't always beat Nico Rosberg, and can't beat George Russell. This is not a team leader. It's that's the thing. Lewis has never, apart from Bottas, had number one driver status, and that's because he just wasn't much better. Maybe not, I mean, maybe not much better is a harsh statement, but not considerably better than his range of teammates up to Bottas.
The interesting thing as well is that on the rare occasions that he doesn't have the fastest car or doesn't have a competitive car, that's when he starts getting beaten by his teammates.
Yeah.
I mean, we've seen this for the past 3 years with George consistently beating him. Even in 2009, Kovalainen was beating him in motor races until they slapped that double diffuser on and he won the next race and yeah, Button was beating him a lot. Okay, two out of three against Rosberg when they were in what were comfortably the fastest cars. It does mean that now, well, on paper, it's win number 105, but by my calculations, I can list at least 20, 21 races that were basically free wins, if you will, or not entirely earned, which is more than, I mean, it scales up because he's got more wins than anyone, but I would say that's more than any other driver can claim.
I don't think there are many drivers who have 21 race wins. So 21 gifted wins is actually a feat.
Yeah, I mean,
maybe that's a record as well.
It's quite an interesting list. I've got it written down so I can go through these just to give some examples. So Turkey 2010, Vettel and Webber collide, gives Mercedes a 1-2. Abu Dhabi 2011, McLaren, sorry, yeah. Such a long time ago, wasn't it? Well, McLaren Mercedes 1-2. Abu Dhabi 2011, Vettel's puncture first corner. Silverstone 2014, Rosberg had gearbox problems. I think he was leading at the time and his gearbox died. Yeah. Japan 2015, Rosberg had power unit problems the whole race and just couldn't fight him at all. Russia 2015, Rosberg retires from the lead. Kota 2015, he pushed Rosberg right off at turn one to take the lead and won off of that with Rosberg right behind him for the rest of the race. Monaco 2016, Ricciardo's dodgy pit stop and then comes out just behind him and can't pass him again. Spain 2017, perfectly timed VSC that meant that him and Vettel both had to pit, but Lewis got to pit on the faster tyre and Vettel had to go long on slower ones. Singapore 2017, that 4-car pile-up in a race where he qualified 5th and should not have won it, but was then leading by turn 4, with all of his main rivals out. Japan 2017, Vettel's car was dead before the race had even begun and probably could have beaten him because Max finished like 2 seconds behind Lewis in that race. Baku 2018, Vettel messed up on the restart and then Bottas got a puncture, so that gives him a win when he would have finished 3rd. Germany 2018, this one's a bit of a touchy one because Vettel had his off from the lead just before a safety car called out. However, Lewis never got penalised for going around the bollards to enter the pit lane. That didn't happen. Italy 2018, this was the funny thing about the aero with Vettel's car, is that he got T-boned by Vettel, but Vettel spun and not Lewis. There was some really funny things going on with the spinning at that time, is that Lewis was just immune to it, even though he should have done it when Vettel did as well, whenever they contact. Sochi 2018, that was team orders. Bottas had to give it away to him. Brazil 2018, Ocon trying to unlap him, Max, and hitting him and spinning him off and giving the win to Lewis. Bahrain 2019, Leclerc's leading and then his V6 turns into a V5. Canada 2019, that extremely questionable penalty for Vettel for going off at turn 4. and finishing first on track. Sochi 2019, Vettel retires just after pitting, triggers a perfectly timed VSC, which allows Lewis to leapfrog Leclerc when he was behind them both. Mexico 2019, Leclerc has a 6-second pit stop. Lewis wins off that. Emilia-Romagna 2020, safety car, VSC is launched just before he pits, and then it ends just after he comes out of the pit lane when he's battling with Bottas. Silverstone 2021, I think we all know what I'm talking about there. I mean, yeah, there's lots of things. Well, first of all, he had terminal damage, and if there were the rule in the red flag was you can't fix your car, he'd also be out. But then also he was given that 10-second penalty when you could even argue, you could almost argue a disqualification, but it should have at least been at minimum a drive-through. And then yesterday, like, okay, yes, he did drove well and he was doing the strategy right and everything, but George was faster on track, and even if the car was legal, still would have won, I think.
Dare I say, Monaco 2008,
No,
he crashed, right? He crashed, went to the pits, changed tires, punctured, changed tires, and boom. That's his race.
I think that's a fair one because I think Massa went off at turn 1. He went into the escape road.
Robert also lost out, right? Because of that. Massa went afterward, but Kubica also suffered because of this, and so did Massa. Lewis crashed, damaged his wing, got a puncture, went to the pits, changed tires, and they were perfect at the time. Something like this happened.
Maybe,
and he
I mean,
ended up
I think
winning.
you could argue that from the perspective that he's always had impenetrable cars, in that he took a hit like that and without getting terminal damage. You could maybe argue that, but otherwise, I think that's a reasonably fair win.
Hungary 2007.
No, that's fair because that was just Alonso shooting himself in the foot and trying to sabotage his race.
Yeah, but Ron Dennis complained. You know that, right?
Yeah.
Ron Dennis complained and led to Alonso's disqualification. So it's basically team.
Yeah, but it was. I mean, Alonso was playing some very dirty tactics in that
that's
weekend.
That's true.
I will just say Hamilton started that by not obeying, because you know how they have a gentleman's agreement in qualifying about who goes first. Hamilton broke that and caused that. And I will also say on the impenetrable cars point, I have a Excel spreadsheet because I'm severely autistic that has a list of all of the F1 drivers who have a pole position, a podium, a win, like all of the or a fastest lap. So all of the drivers who have good results. And of all of them, about 250, 300 drivers, Lewis Hamilton has the best finishing rate of anyone who has more than about 10 Grand Prix starts. He has 90, I think it's like a 91% finishing rate.
He has, I think he's on about 27 or 28 retirements at the moment, and it's about half and half between mechanical and accidents. Yeah. It's quite low. Max alone is on nearly 40, I think. I think Alonso's got 60 or 70 retirements across his career, so he's on more than double what Lewis has.
I think Alonso's most are from the Honda engines. I think it's basically those 3 seasons.
And also because he's been around so long, he was in the era when cars actually used to break down in the first half of the 2000s and all of that, so he has a lot. To attempt to provide some balance, I can also list the races that Lewis didn't win that he probably should have. So for that, Spa 2008, penalty for something that wasn't illegal at the time that it happened. And some people are saying, well, this is balance for what happened there. Europe 2009, he had a very slow pit stop because he was leading, but then the tyre warmers were still on the tyres when he got into his pit box or something, and then Barrichello won. Abu Dhabi 2009, he was told to retire the car to save the pit stop, to save the gearbox, which makes no sense to me because that was the last race of the year and that car was never going to be driven again. So why? Singapore 2012, he's leading and the gearbox dies. Abu Dhabi 2012, he's leading and I think it's either the gearbox or the engine dies. Silverstone 2013, he's leading and then he's the first of 6 drivers to have tyre blowouts in that race. Australia 2014, his engine was very sick. He lost the lead at the start because the engine wasn't working, and then a few laps in, he had to retire the car, and Rosberg won. Monaco 2015, he had they pitted him during a late safety car, which then gave up 2 positions to Vettel and Rosberg. Malaysia 2016, famously, the engine dies. This is the one that everyone say that took the title from him. It's like, actually, there are lots of other places that took the title from him that weren't caused by mechanical problems.
Yeah, but that was not a win, right? Monaco 2016. Or no,
No,
sorry, correct. You're right.
2015, Malaysia 2016. He was leading and the engine blew. I mean, technically, yes, he would have won the championship had that not happened. But then if you're going to throw in, let's take all the mechanical issues off, then it still goes to Rosberg. If you just do it based just off mistakes that year. Baku 2017, he had a loose headrest and he got hit by Vettel behind the safety car. And then, dare I say, Abu Dhabi 21. I mean, by the skin of his teeth, but I think it's going to be a long time before people are ready to have that conversation.
And none of them will be Lewis Hamilton fans.
No. Yeah, it was just. I mean, Twitter was fun yesterday with a tale of two halves for Hamilton fans in their response to everything.
No, the response was predictable, anyways, in both the cases. Honestly, I mean, yeah, Twitter had a field day, but everyone says that ever since Elon Musk bought Twitter, made it X, and now it's become a place. It's become a cesspool. I think even before that, F1 Twitter was a cesspool, anyways. The kind of nonsense that was there even before it, it's still the same. The negativity is there, and I don't understand. Look, maybe I take these things from a very different way because I appreciated George winning. I found it hilarious when he got the disqualification because I knew what was going to happen afterwards. So for me, that is the perspective through which I look at things. But the way people look, this might be from now onwards, or maybe from since Miami, you can say Miami until the end of the 2025 F1 season. This might be one of the better periods for Formula One, where cars will be closer. You'll see battles, you'll see championship maybe being contested. You won't see it in 2026, I can tell you already. We didn't see it in 2022, we didn't see it in 2023, and honestly, during the turbo hybrid era, we had to wait till 2021 to have a championship battle. So enjoy this period. You are in a period where it doesn't matter if you are a Lewis fan, George fan, Max, probably not Alonso fan, any of the top 8 drivers. If you're a fan of them, you're going to see either of them win races. And what more do you want? Maybe some days it won't go the direction you wanted, but overall, it's you have your favorite driver in a competitive car. Enjoy this period, honestly.
I completely agree with that. Most F1 fans nowadays are just like, it's all about my favorite driver, and anything that even slightly makes him have a problem or slightly misconveniences him needs to be thrown into a well of fire and death. But yeah, I just don't. We always know that the first couple of years after an engine or after a regulation change, whether it's engines, whether it's aerodynamics, is going to be crap. We saw it, although there was no competition to Mercedes in the turbo hybrid era, like you said. The ground effect cars, there was no competition to start with. It was a bit different with the changes from the rabbit-eared kind of smaller cars to the longer, more refined ones of 2009 and 10. That was a bit more different. But yeah, historically, most regulation changes, especially aerodynamic ones in the modern era, because obviously since the FIA have just decided, okay, we're going to add some sort of our own thing into it, since it wasn't just to get rid of dangerous things like the original ground effect ban, the original turbo ban, the original all that sort of jazz. Yeah, the first couple of years of a regulation set are crap, and then once everyone closes up, the FIA decide to reset it all again and make the next couple of seasons crap. So I say we just bin off the FIA and let me run it all.
This played into possibly the reasons for George's disqualification, because this weekend Mercedes had brought a new floor, which they then took off the car on Friday. And so the prevailing theory is because some people were pointing at tyres and saying, because he ran so long, the tyre wear took the weight off, but then that would have had to be about 350 grams per tyre. And because they go into the pit lane immediately, there isn't a chance to pick up marbles and that. But the thing is, he wasn't the only person to do a one stop, so I don't think it's got anything to do with tyres. Is that they think that maybe they messed up the ballast when they took the new floor off and did something, but then only did it on George's, and it must have been done on Saturday night because the car wasn't disqualified from qualifying for being underweight. So something's gone wrong there with the mechanics and the engineers to lose 1.5 kilos. But the point is that they took those upgrades off because what's happened now is that it's taken 3 years, but everyone has basically reached peak development. And the cars are not going to get any faster, short of just directly copying whichever of those 4 teams has the fastest car. They're not going to improve. And that's why we're seeing that Mercedes are taking these off. Every time Aston Martin bring upgrades, the car gets slower. Sauber have been bringing rafts of upgrades at every race, and the only thing that's got faster are their pit stops. So it's just like, now it's great that it's really, really close at the front, but the thing is that we've never been closer to a spec series. And because we're in a position now where the FIA dictates how the cars are going to look, and we've had this since 2009 roughly, that we want them to be this long and this height and have this many elements and do this, and you have to conform to this. And now it's, when it used to be that people would bring in new things like turbo engines, the original wings, ground effects, active suspension, and then the FIA says, okay, we need to bring in rules about this to rein them in, or because it's too dangerous or whatever, instead of, let's decide how the cars are going to look. And we've got this again in 26. So this is going to happen again, is that at the beginning of 26, one of the teams will crack the code, and it'll take everyone else 3 years to catch up with them and get close again, instead of just giving kind of creative freedom to the engineers to come up with something new. And for the time being, it's good that to see the top 8 so close in this race was amazing. And I mentioned before that nobody was tire saving. They were pushing really hard. That's great. But it's also making it kind of a stalemate because of how difficult overtaking was for everyone in this race.
Yeah. I think the biggest problem with overtaking has been, again, Mark Hughes touched on it. One of the major reasons what made Daniel Ricciardo so brilliant earlier in 2014-16, not now, was the fact that the way he used to pull off those overtakes was the braking distance was much bigger than it is right now. The brake discs have gotten much larger. What that has done is the braking distance is small. Whether it is on a used tire or a fresh tire, the kind of gap that we tended to expect, it's not there anymore. And that's what even Lewis touched on, where he said that the late braking style is not something that suits these cars. And I think we are seeing a lot more of this. When it comes to pulling off, and I think this is something that even MotoGP is suffering from, where they've the continuous drive of trying to make these cars faster and faster and better. What that does is it takes them to a point where, whoa, is it an earthquake or something? No. Okay, so everything's fine. Yeah,
You have
I felt
earthquakes
there
in
was
India?
plenty.
Okay.
Only mild ones, but plenty.
Okay, right.
That would have been fun, actually. Yeah, the fan's not moving. So yeah, I think no earthquake. Everything's fine.
Okay.
We're good to go. Yeah. Apologies for the distraction. Big distraction. It's all fine, right? Yeah, okay. Anyways. What was I talking about? Yeah, the braking distance. So what that has done is, even at Spa, there was something that was very peculiar is at the bus stop chicane, how many overtakes did we see this season? This race? Not that many, right?
I remember
One,
Verstappen
maybe?
on whoever it was. Gasly?
Albon, yeah.
One, yeah.
I think that was
Yeah.
the only one at bus stop.
Precisely. While that used to be one of the main overtaking zones. The reason behind it, first of all, the cars are fat as fuck. And secondly, the braking zone is so small that you can say the margin of error, it has reduced to such an extent that you have a tire that is highly degraded or a fresh tire, it doesn't make a difference. And these are the things that actually F1 needs to work on, because they have to aid overtaking. Just having DRS zones is not going to cut it. So yeah, that's where we are, sadly.
I agree. F1 cars have become, I think the word I'm going to use is efficient. They've become too efficient. They're too efficient in braking zones. They're too efficient with the aero. Like, for example, the reason why, like Monza has had a couple of good races in the past few years, Gasly winning, Ricciardo winning, but we haven't seen much actual overtaking because the cars are so efficient in a straight line that DRS does nothing. They all run skinny as fuck wings that are literally flat like that, so that there's no actual benefit to the DRS. Which makes me think that they should either introduce minimum rear wing angles at Monza, at tracks like Monza where overtaking is difficult, so that it forces teams to so it forces DRS to actually be effective, or they should just make the cars less aero efficient. Just say, I don't know, you have to have certain, like for example, I know in karts back in the day, they used to have what they call the Hanford device, which was where they literally install like a splitter to the rear wing, so it literally had like a 45-degree angle, so it made following a lot easier than what it would have been otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, and I've been saying this for years now, but the cars have never been easier to drive. I mean, that was evident alone just by Behrman's performance in Saudi Arabia. Like he
Yeah.
shouldn't have been able to drive that well as a rookie. Because now, if you go back again 20, 25 years, those cars, a lot of it probably was the grooved tires, but they were much lighter. They were less aerodynamically efficient. But you would see that the driver still had to wrestle with them, and also people crashed. Even Schumacher crashed sometimes. I mean, these days, like even Sargent crashing is becoming a rare occasion now. Like we just don't have it. We don't often get collisions between drivers anymore either. There's normally something that happens at turn one. That hardly ever happens now. Mistakes are just very, very rare, but then people are having to push because the gaps are so close. People are pushing really, really hard at the same time, but it's not. It's becoming a bit kind of, I don't know if monotone is the right word, but yeah, just they're close together, but things aren't happening enough.
I think maybe I might be wrong, but I think what happened in Austria has played a role because if you remember Austria first during the sprint, Alonso was penalized for, or was it Alonso or no, Hulkenberg was penalized for the dive bomb on Alonso during the sprint. Then Alonso was penalized in the race. Then Max was penalized. And there was something that almost every driver talked about. It was the fact that we are making too many, how should you put it? We are being too stringent on racing.
Too many
And then
penalties.
too many penalties. And what that has done is it has made drivers being a bit too cautious. Then you add to this the factor that now in case of Red Bull, as I said earlier, I mean when we were talking about this thing that I felt Max was being a bit too conservative in Hungary when it was battling Lewis until he crashed into it. Before that, and until that, I mean I just it's actually funny because I tweeted about it that I think Max is being very conservative today, and within 5 minutes he just T-boned him, had a collision with Lewis, and yeah, the comments were fun on that post. So what it does appear is since we have this cost cap in place as well, which limits the amount of money you can actually allocate to car development and other stuff, drivers are forced to be wary when it comes to the whole risk reward assessment. They're being told to keep an eye on not try for the 50-50 moves. Like Magnussen started the season with dive bombs. His only role was blocking everyone so that Hulkenberg can score points. That was what he was doing essentially, and he did it well. But now, if at this stage, if he would be, if Haas would actually have a conversation with him, it would be keep the crashes in check, and that is something I think even I think it was Automotor and Sport. They reported about Aston Martin that that team is almost at the brink of its development budget. So they've actually told the drivers not to crash, and then Stroll crashed. Great. So maybe that is also playing a role, but it does appear that the risk-averse nature of drivers is starting to come to the fore. And honestly, for a viewer, that is just not what we want to see. I haven't seen a single dive bomb.
If Kobayashi was racing today, he'd just be crashing into everyone because of the problems with braking distance and everything as well.
Yeah.
One thing
I miss him actually, Kobayashi.
Everyone does, I think.
I think one thing that people haven't considered is just that, like, as I said, you talked about like the penalties and stuff. I think the cars don't help, and also the fact that while the cars have got so much bigger in the past few years, like since I started watching in 2012, the cars have gotten bigger, and the tracks haven't got any bigger to accommodate. Like, for example, you mentioned the bus stop. The reason why no one goes for a move into the bus stop is not just because of the cars and because of the risk and reward, but the run through Blanchimont is pretty much like you can't go side by side with there unless you want a death wish, unless you want to end up like Luciano Berti. Like, I just think that it's a bit nuts. And also, like, I think this is also an indictment of modern racing in general. Like, NASCAR has this same problem where there's no like personalities anymore. The only aggressive drivers we have really are Hamilton and Verstappen. Like back in 2012 when I first started watching, and I always mention 2012 because it's like a zenith season for me, is you had Maldonado, you had Perez, you had Kobayashi, you had Alonso, you had Hamilton, you had all those drivers who were known for their aggressive moves, who were known for fighting and known for pushing the limits. And we don't have that anymore. Like, not really. It's just kind of diluted. And I think smaller cars with more peaky downforce, which is like which is more harder to drive, more aggressive, something more similar to what we have in IndyCar, where they're slower, they have no power steering and that sort of stuff. It makes the racing more raw and more entertaining. I'm all for more raw and entertaining racing where you see the best of the best occasionally spin on and go off, because we haven't seen a proper driver mistake in just driving on their own, not in terms of wheel-to-wheel combat, but in terms of driving on their own. From Hamilton or Verstappen, I can't remember the last time Hamilton or Verstappen spun out of a race.
I mean, Lewis, in terms of spinning off a race, the closest example I can think of is Imola 21, but then he still finished second. Again, that's another one. It wasn't a win, but that was a free second place because of that, like, perfectly timed red flag caused by his teammate, ironically.
Hungary as well.
Yes, Hungary. I mean, this is when people say, "Oh, Abu Dhabi cost him the title." No, Hungary and Baku cost him the title, not Abu Dhabi. Oh God. So
I think
okay,
one thing actually I wanted to ask. I mean, didn't NASCAR just recently have that little guy punching Kyle Busch?
that fist
Ricky,
fight. Oh, that was fun.
Ricky
Yeah.
Stenhouse Jr.
Ricky Stenhouse, yeah.
Yeah, they take a guy and they take that footage, they promote it all over social media, promote the sport, and then fine him 50 grand. That's what
Well,
they did.
that's
They fine drivers for things they promote with. It's
They
nuts.
find him, but 50 grand is nothing, right? Ricky Stenhouse, he earns well, and even I think Kyle Busch earns. I mean, he got punched, so it doesn't really matter at this stage.
I mean,
Kyle
these
Busch is a big
their salaries, they're not like Formula One level, but they're still pretty generous
They're good.
salaries.
They're very good. The
Yeah.
highest is 29 million, which is F1 level, honestly.
And it's like don't punish them for that. I mean, to be honest, it's NASCAR. It's a sport for rednecks. Of course, they can have fist fights, and this is how you get viewership. I mean, we haven't had a punch up in Formula One since what, Germany 1982, or actually no Max 2018, and that was just a bit of a shove. Like, wasn't
That was that Spa 1998 Schumacher. You could talk about that.
that nearly was. Yeah, that was.
Yeah,
that was good.
If DC came in front of him that day,
God,
it would have been something else.
I just love that shot of him walking into the pit lane. It's so good.
That was nearly F1's. I can't remember who it was. Clint Boyer. This is another NASCAR reference. Literally had his entire garage walking to another driver, and it was nearly the biggest brawl in NASCAR history because he was literally going up to beat the living shit out of one of the drivers that had just crashed him out. I can't remember which race it was. I think it might have been Phoenix or Martinsville one year.
I think MotoGP had this with Valentino Rossi and Sete Gibernau, if I'm not wrong. And Sete Gibernau had what should we call it? He had a black eye on the podium because Rossi punched him in the cool down room. So, and they had it in 2000 or 1999, something like that. That was something as well.
I think Jeremy Clarkson
had that.
Yeah, I think Jeremy Clarkson was. You remember when he said on Top Gear, Hamilton and Massa, you have a problem, you go on the podium and you slug it out. I can't remember which episode he said that on, but he said something to the effect of that.
Yeah, it was in 2011 when basically Lewis and Massa just kept crashing into each other.
I think there was also when Hamilton appeared as a star in the Reese Price car, he asked him who would win in a fight amongst all the drivers. And I think Lewis, well, I do well because I used to do boxing. Maybe his vegan diet wouldn't help him so much these days. I don't know who'd be good in a fight, to be honest, out of all the drivers.
Daniel.
I'm feeling Max would be because he'd just be rage.
Max has rage, but also he's very tall. He's one of the broader drivers. Sainz would be good in a fight, I think, because he does a bit of boxing. Tsunoda would probably be he'd probably be a kind of Rey Mysterio type thing.
He'd be like a chihuahua snapping at your heels.
He'd be surprisingly good, I think, Tsunoda.
Daniel actually trains with this Max Holloway and other UFC fighters. He's done a lot of features. And he's actually there in a lot of these fights.
He'd be all right. The rest of them, like George is too lanky. The same with Ocon. Alonso, I think, could hold his own in a fight.
Yeah.
Logan, I think, could be underrated because he's American and he's young and fit and.
Well, he's American. He'll just shoot you. Like.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
What the fuck is a kilometer?
So now Ciaron has joined us. Hello, Ciaron. How are you doing?
Doing well, Peter. Glad to be here. Also glad to be here with Nedzo and Casual F1 fan. And I'm glad to be, a Formula One fan who is able to accurately predict things such as, McLaren dropping the ball yet again for the ninth race in a row now. At the end of the day, in Formula One, oftentimes, a fan who maybe just started watching, in the past few months or doesn't really, watch the sport regularly may think, the finishing results of a race are indicative of, generally the performance of the cars. And that's just not been the case in Formula One recently. I truly believe that, and I know you guys have covered this, so I'm not going to beat this drum for too long, that Mercedes have the best driver lineup in Formula One by a huge margin. And so they're able to eke out results like this, even though they got disqualified today, that flatter the fundamental underlying characteristics of their car. And McLaren have a slightly weaker driver lineup. So on a consistent basis, even though they have a car to win all these races, they simply do not achieve the results that their car deserves. So let's think about this, right? And people say, "Oh, Ciaron, what nonsense! Why do you even talk? Everything you say is wrong." Well, think about Norris, right? Norris had a horrible start, right? He literally put two of his wheels on the gravel, dropped behind his teammate, he dropped behind George. So what happened is that the team had to think about how do we fix this mess that Lando yet again has created. Okay, so let's increase his first stint, right? Let's try and give him the overcut, right? Well, actually what happened was he was undercut as a result. So not only that, he lost position on a track where, it's easier to pass, but track position still goes a long way. Then Piastri was absolutely, showing that he had great speed when he had some free air. But the problem is that even Oscar, for all his consistency and for, all the hype that I think he has, he overshot his marks at his, his final pit stops. So that cost him like 2 seconds again. So yes, he picked off the Ferrari. Yes, he passed the Ferrari at the end. But he didn't have enough laps even to challenge the Mercedes cars. So think about this. He had so much speed at the end. If there were a few more laps, you've got to say Oscar probably could have passed the Mercedes cars. He had that kind of speed. And I don't agree with the McLaren drivers post race. I don't agree that Oscar says, "Oh, like what a great result. Like I think I maximized the car." No, you didn't. Yet again, you made a mistake costing you like 2 to 3 seconds in a race. In Formula One, if you come out of, like, I've watched the sport for long enough to know, if you come out of a race and say, "Oh, I lost 2 to 3 seconds one lap or one pit stop, but I think I maximized the car," you're contradicting yourself. Every single second matters. And I think at the end of the day, yes, tire deg was lower today, so McLaren probably thought they could pass more cars than they did. But I still think that even with the fact that, yes, the one stop was a viable option, tire deg was lower, McLaren did not perform as they should have in qualifying. And crucially, Lando did not have an error-free race yet again. He didn't qualify well, and he lost positions at the start. After he lost positions at the start, he simply could not recover those positions, despite having what I think was the fastest car. So I'll stop here, but I really think McLaren should be ashamed of themselves. I really do think they had the fastest car yet again. The data suggests that. The driver's comment suggests that. Andrea Stella's comment suggests that. And at some point, this team needs to have a good look at its operations and just say, it's not good enough. It's just not good enough. What do you guys think?
I mean, McLaren is starting to remind me. Obviously, I wasn't alive at this point, but I think a couple of episodes ago, Peter made reference to 1995, and Williams. I think that McLaren nowadays is turning into 1994 and 95 Williams, where they have they have the fastest car. I think they have just about the fastest car now. I think it's impossible to tell the exact order at any given weekend because it's based on track characteristics. But at most tracks, I think they probably have at least marginally the fastest car. Whether it's Mercedes second, Red Bull third, Red Bull second, Mercedes third, or we switch them around a bit if Red Bull gears up or Mercedes gears up towards the end of the season. I just think, well, Lando's made a couple of mistakes in the past few races. They've made a couple of mistakes on strategy. I mean, I think Oscar saying he maximised what he could out of the car is mostly true because on track he did maximise the car, but in the pit stops he didn't, which is not really a car. You don't maximise the car in the pit stops; you maximise the car out on track. So I can sort of see where he's coming from. But yeah, I think Lando Norris is turning into Damon Hill, where he can't seem to string together a good set of results to save his life, and only has a handful of properly good races in his entire career. And Piastri's cool, calm, collected, and he has the consistency, but he doesn't have the speed. And Lando has the speed, but doesn't have the consistency, which is the problem they have.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting. Casual F1 fan. Sorry, did you want to jump in?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So first of all, I think one crucial thing, Ciaron, you touched on. Lando Norris had a bad start yet again. Now, just to actually specifically talk about this thing, I think we all kind of agree on this. Max Verstappen is a benchmark in Formula One right now, in terms of drivers, right? More or less.
I think in
When was
terms
the
of
la-
raw speed, yes, I agree with you.
I'd say what I mean is in terms of overall, in terms of the all-round ability, I think he's at the top right now.
Yes.
So when I talk about that, when was the last time Max Verstappen lost a position on the first lap of the race? Not this season. The last time he lost a position on the first lap of the race was in Qatar Sprint last season. And we've had more than 14 races since that has happened. And that is actually the kind of level at which the very peak of Formula One, you have these drivers that are performing at that particular level, where there's nothing wrong. There's no box that you can say where he's lagging. And that is the driver that you actually have to beat. Why Lando is suffering right now is, I think I understand there are areas where he's probably weaker. I think the emotional aspect is there. And I think there's another aspect of self doubt that kind of reflects. He gets a bit too antsy in the car when maybe he has to be more calm and focused with the job at hand. But what I feel about McLaren is I tend to give them a bit of a concession because I feel this is not the same McLaren that was winning in 2011, 2012, or before that. This is the new McLaren. This is the one that is under Zach Brown, which is basically gone through an entire restructuring process. And right now, it is still trying to understand and grab a hold of the reality that it is a top team and it needs to act like a top team. They tried something with Lando, which was trying for the overcut. It didn't work here because the biggest issue was that the DRS zone was shortened, which reduced the overtaking ability. That's why Lando was stuck behind Max throughout the race. So when it comes to all these things, and so again, I think I'm slightly divergent in with your view of McLaren being the fastest car. I think maybe Red Bull under with Max was quicker. The problem was that everyone was just stuck in the DRS train, and you really can't do much with that. In the end, in Formula One, what stood out in Spa was track position is king, and operational efficiency is going to win you races. It was the operational efficiency that cost Lando the win in Silverstone. It was his mistake that cost him win in Hungary, his mistake that cost win him Barcelona, and a few other races. So maybe that is one area where McLaren and Lando they need to sit down and work on it. I think we don't understand one thing, which is that Max Red Bull combination. It didn't happen overnight. It took years. It took years of Max also throwing away races. I mean, I still remember in 2018 Brazil, where Max had a crash with Ocon, and I think we talked about it earlier as well. Lewis said something to Max in the cool down room where he said, sure, he tried to overtake you there, but you should not have been involved in that kind of an incident. ultimately the biggest loser was Max in that particular day, and Max learned from it. So Lando will learn from it, I hope, or maybe Oscar will learn from it. But yeah, I still give them concession because at least for now they're getting the car right. Now they have to focus on getting the other areas rounded. Always remember, Red Bull was not the best operational team in 2010, 2009, or 11. It grew and evolved, and every team goes through this process.
Very interesting take, but let me pose a few questions back in rebuttal. So, if we're going to use the Red Bull example of 2009, 2010, 2011, it's a good example, but if you look at Red Bull in 2009, they didn't have a car like this until maybe midway through the season. I still think Vettel should have won that title, but they were winning races. Okay, they weren't dropping the ball to this extent, in my opinion. And by 2010, they were dominant. Now, another thing I want to bring up is both Vettel in 2009 and Verstappen in 2018 were significantly less experienced than Norris is now. Remember, it's not so much about the age of the driver, as we all know here, it's about their experience. Norris is experienced. I remind listeners, this is his 6th season in Formula One. He's been in F1 for over half a decade. And to be making these mistakes under pressure on a consistent basis, which he's doing, is not good enough. And because we live in a time where, I think the drivers are coddled a little bit, and because Norris for some reason is being compared directly to a teammate that's only in his 2nd season, I think Norris is getting a pass from the media. Like, think about a great driver that Max Verstappen, right? Think about his 6th season in Formula One. Think about Michael Schumacher's 6th season, right? You can go down the list. It's not good enough. Like, I don't think the excuse of him learning at this point is acceptable, because at this point in your career, you should be showing that maturity. You've been in F1 long enough that you should be able to quickly pick this up. There's been several races in a row that this guy has not been able to close out a win properly. And the only race that he won was largely down to a safety car error. This is not good enough. If I were McLaren, if I were the board of directors, John Najaffi, Zach Brown, the Bahrainis, I would be furious. I would literally be on the verge of breaking something when I'm watching these races, because so much time and effort has been put into this project, and now they're just throwing it away race after race. Like, you say Max and Red Bull were quickest. They were quickest, but how much of that was down to Max? Like, if you look at the data, Max had a medium downforce configuration this weekend. And from all the tracks that we've seen, low downforce tracks that we've gone to, the data suggests that McLaren were just as fast around in the corners, and that they just, as Andrea Stella has admitted, they had a terrible qualifying. Those were not the true positions of the car. And it wasn't just the fact that, like you said, the DRS zone was shortened. I think tire deg was just way better than everyone expected. So people could do a one stop and maintain track position more easily. And in the end, I believe that the pecking order in terms of raw speed was McLaren slightly ahead of Red Bull this weekend, with Mercedes 3rd and Ferrari 4th. Leclerc did a screamer, absolute stunner of a lap in qualifying. That was not where the Ferrari deserved to be. And I think if you look at it, it wasn't Red Bull that was flying in free air. I really think it was Max. He was in a different planet yet again. As he was at Spa in 2022 when he made a mockery of the circuit. I think he started 15th and just passed everybody. So he's a bit of a specialist around this track, you have to say. But I think to sum it up, I think I agree with you. They're still learning how to win. I just feel like that excuse is running thin. Like, at some point you need to start winning. You can't just be learning all the time. The media can't just be fawning over you just because you have agreeable personalities. So I think what we're seeing is just totally unacceptable from McLaren, and I would be looking at end of season changes if this doesn't turn around soon. They're wasting the best car, in my opinion.
When you started talking about 6 seasons, I was racking my brain thinking which champions weren't good in their 6th season. And I went through all the greats. Obviously, you said Schumacher, you said the likes of Hamilton, Verstappen, those kind of drivers, and they'd already at least won a championship. But one driver I thought of, Nigel Mansell. Nigel Mansell, by the time he was in his 6th Formula One season, had only just won his first race. He just got into a Williams and he was up against Nelson Piquet, and he was like what Lando was. He was up against, admittedly, he was in the same team as Nelson Piquet. He was up against an established champion who'd proven himself over a course of years, and he was inconsistent, but he had raw pace, and he had raw pace in buckets, but lacked the consistency and the look as well to be able to win a championship until his 12th or 13th season in Formula One, if you count 1980, where he did like a handful of races. And yeah, like it's the same thing with Mansell, where up until Mansell he took 1980 when he was in the Lotus, which was awful, and the Lotuses through 81 through 84 were, I mean, 84 was race winning, I think, in the hands of De Angelis in, I can't remember where it was. I think it won, pardon?
Portugal, I think. Estoril.
Portugal, Estoril. Oh yeah, the first Portuguese Grand Prix at Estoril. But it was a race-winning car in the hands of De Angelis. But I think Mansell had proven better over the season, but just was inconsistent overall. And again, 1986 was his first chance at a title, and he took it to the final race and should have won it really in the fastest car. I think that the fact that Lando is now he's now in the fastest car on the grid, in my opinion, but he's recovering a deficit. He's doing what Vettel did in 2011. I mean, he's got more time than Vettel had in 2011, I think. Or maybe actually you could say it's a similar time frame, because after Button won his last race, Braun started their slow downward slope to be in the 4th or 5th quickest car at the end of the season. I think the critiques on Lando, don't get me wrong, I think Lando has bottled it a few times. I think going to the point where you're saying you have to consider new driver options for 2025 is a bit harsh. Like, he's bad. He's had some mistakes, but he's not that bad, in my opinion. Because who are you going to get? Who are you going to bring back? Science. Like, that's pretty much your only option for a better option. Like, we're not in a situation where we can do that. I think Lando is proving to be a Nigel Mansell type. It's ironic that in terms of driving, he's similar to him. I mean, obviously not in terms of driving styles, because Mansell was uber aggressive, uber gutsy driver, and Lando is a lot smoother, possibly due to the thing of cars, but he's also more likable. Like, Mansell was a very likable character with the British public. Lando is a very likable character, even if he's not the most likable to long-time F1 fans who don't kind of see the Drive to Survive aspects of it. He is kind of he reminds me of Nigel Mansell in a lot of ways. And I do think that if for example, McLaren pulled out other stops next season and it was the fastest car, he'd beat Oscar in a fight. He'd beat Oscar in a championship fight. But I think this season isn't for him. He's recovering a deficit, which means he's pushing harder, making more mistakes. If the McLaren had been the fastest car at the start of the season, I think we'd be seeing a different thing. I think it'd still be a fight, but I think he wouldn't be making this many mistakes.
Yeah, I think there's one thing that we actually do miss out on. 2008, 2009, 2010. What was the margin of error for a Vettel in 2009 when it came to winning races? What is the margin of error for Lando Norris in 2024 when it comes to winning races? It's not much in 2024. It's much reduced. Your errors are going to get penalized a lot more as compared to maybe a Vettel in 2000. By the way, a huge Vettel fan. I still think he was unfairly treated by the media throughout his career. One of the greats in my view. Still, in 2009, I feel he had slightly. For Vettel, his battle was maybe against a Weber, maybe to an extent against a Braun or a resurging McLaren. That is it. But for a Lando Norris in 2024, he has to battle arguably one of the greatest talents in Formula. Again, I'm being way too hyperbolic. One of the greatest talents in F1, that have driven in Max, one of the greatest talents in Lewis. Then there is a George who is very impressive. Then there's also an Oscar who I think has not reached his final, you can say, complete flourished form. And then you have a Charles Leclerc who's again a brilliant driver. When you have such a talent dense grid in front of you, and all of them are in a very similar cars, it's not a massive difference, by the way, in terms of car performance. Then maybe your errors get enhanced a bit. Again, I agree with you. You have to be better. I'd say Max was probably one of the drivers who was more ready when it comes to winning races when he came into Formula One. He showed it in 2016. Not many drivers are at that level. But I think for now, I would. At the end, again, this is something actually I talked about it a lot on the podcast that I do. This season, specifically the 2024 season, it is more of a stress test for McLaren, where they have the best possibility in terms of finding out where they are actually weak and then working on it, because 2025 is going to be a full-fledged battle with probably Red Bull and Mercedes to an extent. So maybe they are building towards that, and if they're smart enough, they're building towards that and focusing on areas where they're weak. And there are a lot of areas where they're weak at this stage.
So let me clarify, and again, excellent points from everyone here. So let me clarify something. I don't necessarily think it only has to be a driver change that McLaren have to adjust. I think they need to look at their operations and their drivers and just say, how can we be better? That could mean different prep. That could be certain routine the driver has to do. That could be a driver change. It could be a technical director change, although I don't think the technical director structure at McLaren has proven to be anything less than brilliant so far. But something operationally and with the drivers should be looked at least, because it just isn't happening. We can argue about why it's not happening, but it's not happening. Okay, I want to quickly address a few points quickly here. Okay, so Nigel Mansell, right? Nigel never had a car like this early in his career, I firmly believe, and he never had such. Nigel was he had to go through some tough times. I mean, Peter War, when he joined, right, Lotus, Peter War hated him, right? The team boss said Mansell, at some points would say Mansell would never ever win a race in his career. Multiple fights between Mansell and Peter War. The race you mentioned, casual F1 fan, at the 1984 Portuguese Grand Prix, right? I mean, it's very well known that Mansell believes that he wasn't given the brake pads that were necessary to win that race. Otherwise, he would have won it. And that De Angelis was generally favored in the team. And I think there's a lot of evidence to suggest that. Lando has never even come close to anything like that. He's been racing for a British team where they just love him and give him full support all the time. Mansell was going at it with much less competitive cars and way tougher teammates. Like, let me tell you something. I mean, Elio De Angelis was prime time. Okay, that guy was the real deal. Everyone knows that, right? You don't have to be watching F1 live at the time to know De Angelis was the real deal. And then KK Rosberg. Don't judge him by 1986. KK Rosberg was a contender for the quickest driver on raw speed in F1 in 1985. I mean, that was Mansell's first season at Williams. You can't compare that to Lando, who's been at McLaren for literally 6 seasons straight. And then, in his 6th season, who did he beat? He didn't beat Oscar Piastri or the equivalent. He beat Nelson Piquet. That's unbelievable. I mean, like, Nelson Piquet, you can say what you want about him as a person. That's one of the greatest drivers ever, period. I mean, in terms of anything that you can think of, one of the most complete drivers ever. And we mentioned, the grid now is very strong. I mean, yeah, it's like Russell and Leclerc and 40-year-old Lewis Hamilton. Like, okay, cool. I mean, look at who Mansell had to go up against in 86. Senna, Piquet, Prost, Rosberg. I mean, that is the golden era of Formula One, even today, right? That era was stronger than this era in terms of driver talent, in my opinion. And Mansell still, I think, performed better than what Lando's doing, right? Like, I remember Nigel being equally brilliant and frustrating when I went back and watched those seasons. And I actually think that, Nedzo, you're flattering Lando by saying that, comparing him to Nigel. Nigel was a warrior. Red 5. You know, the man was like, he had his brand of racing where so many people would just be in love with this guy. They would be obsessed with Nigel. He to this day, you could argue there hasn't been a British driver that has captured the hearts of the British public like Nigel did. Do you think the British public would ever invade the track the way that they did for Mansell, for Lando Norris? I don't think so. Not even close. And I think Nigel had tougher tests even up to that point in his career. So I think Lando still falls short even with that comparison. I acknowledge it. I think Mansell is a good example of someone that took a few more years to mature. But I think Lando is still behind in his development compared to Nigel. I mean, Nigel was up against some way tougher teammates than what Lando has faced in inferior cars than what Lando has driven. And he still did very well. So look, we can sit here and debate this all day. I just don't think it's good enough from McLaren. And if I'm John Najaffe, right, one of the directors of the team, if I'm Zach Brown, if I'm the Bahraini investors, anybody else who's involved, I'm not happy right now. And guess what? If I'm Lando Norris, I'm not happy. And guess what? Lando's quotes reflect that. He admits he made yet again another stupid mistake that hurt him and cost him a chance to win this race. This is unacceptable. You have at least one of the fastest cars. If you don't think it's the quickest, I think it's joint quickest at best, at worst. Joint quickest in F1. You cannot be botching races. So many races. This is like 8 or 9 races now that they're just not getting the result that they deserve. Rephrase that before I stop talking. They're not getting the result that their car deserves. And yeah.
There are very few champions who didn't win their first title within 6 full seasons. Mansell, that was his 12th or 13th season. Rosberg, it was his 11th. Hakkinen was his 8th full season. Button, that was his 10th full season. And then Scheckter, that was actually his 6th one. The rest of them, it was all done within 5 years, I think. So maybe we'll see Lando, if this analogy continues, maybe Lando will win the title in 2031 or something. But yeah, it's just, I think a lot of people are falling short in general, even though we have a grid that is for years now, people have been saying how exciting it is that we have these prospects, because Lando and Charles in particular are the ones just not living up to expectations and falling short at the moment. Speaking of Charles, let's talk about Ferrari. That was, more. So for him specifically, the first 2 stints were very good. In that, yes, he got passed by Lewis, but he kept within about 2 seconds of Lewis, and he was keeping the pace up. He then fell off in his final stint, but they tried undercuts, which didn't work. They tried overcuts, which didn't work. God knows what was happening with Sainz's strategy, but that again did not work. And they're just falling back into bad habits at this point.
I think when it comes to Ferrari, I've always been very circumspect whenever this team surges. I think what Ferrari does at the front is what Alpine used to do in the midfield. They'll fall back, be mediocre, then be slightly less mediocre, finish P4 and then fall back. Ferrari does it at the front, where it gets better, it gets a little more competitive, it gives people hope, and then it falls back. I think we are slowly in a phase where Ferrari showed us hope when Leclerc finally won the race in Monaco. And then we've slowly seen the same old habits come back. What was something that was characteristic about Mattia Binotto's stint or Maurizio Rivabene's stint? Or not to an extent, maybe Domenicali was a bit different. They were pretty poor when it comes to the operational aspects. Both Binotto, to an extent, Rivabene as well. Right now, what we are seeing with Fred Vasseur is, I expected something different, but at least in the last 2 races, the operational aspect has been poor. Leclerc should have been on the podium. I think Leclerc should have beaten Lewis in Hungary. He was pitted at the wrong time when he made his second pit stop, and that just compromises his entire race. Then we come to Spa. Again, a similar thing. First, they let Lewis undercut him. Then when they try to do the undercut, they have a slow pit stop. Then we have Carlos Sainz ahead of Lewis, and he's holding him up while Leclerc is catching him. And I think by that time, everyone knew the fact that if Leclerc could get a run on Lewis on the straight where he was quicker, he could have maybe got the jump on him. And as we've seen in the entire race, it's not easy to overtake. But what does Ferrari do? As soon as the gap falls from 2.5 to 2 seconds, they move Sainz out of the way. They pit him. They give Lewis the entire track and just let him go ahead. And these are some very minor things and some very minor mistakes that you ideally would not see from a Red Bull or from a Mercedes to a certain extent. Other Mercedes fucks up a lot of things as well. Ferrari is still not there. Again, this is your basic operational aspect. What they're doing with the upgrades is an entirely different story. It's just that I think we are back at that stage, and I feel actually sad for Charles how many times he has committed to Ferrari that it does appear it's the same deja vu that he'll be going through that he went through in 2020, to an extent in 2023, where the team starts surging and then falls back a bit, acts mediocre, gets a result that is one or two places lower than what the car deserves or what the driver deserves, and we are just stuck there.
Yeah. So I think, I agree with most of that. I think at the end of the day, Ferrari had a philosophy going into this weekend. They wanted to maximize their top speeds because they know their car's great weakness is drag. So they went into the race with a different downforce configuration than most of the other teams. But the outcome is the same for Ferrari every weekend, isn't it? I mean, it's a prancing horse that crashes into a barn door, and then they start complaining about it afterwards. I mean, they don't really know what they're doing, and I'm just getting fed up with this team because every single year they have the same issues. There's always a car that doesn't work its tires properly, that doesn't have enough mechanical grip, and understeers. And then if it oversteers too much, and both drivers are complaining. So this team has an issue when it comes to mechanical grip. They don't seem to be at the level of the Mercedes, Red Bull, McLarens of the world. They can really fine-tune the characteristics of their car to put car setup and tire wear in harmony. There's always some issue there, and if the car has good mechanical grip, then aero grip is massively lacking. Or if the car has good aero grip, mechanical grip is lacking. There's just something in this team that just still isn't quite there as it should be. And I mean, regarding the race, I mean, what is there really to say? Leclerc was passed by Hamilton. He looked like P2 was possible, or P3, I should say, but Piastri passed him. Russell and Mercedes outsmarted Ferrari with the way that they executed the one stop. And I think Ferrari were just caught out by the fact that the hard tire had way less graining than they thought. And they struggled on the medium tire. So, frankly speaking, I think the sentiment was that inside the cockpit for Leclerc was that, oh man, like we're stopping way too early in the first stint. But actually, they probably should have stopped even before, if you look at the performance of the hard tire. And with Sainz, it was just, I think Sainz had a really disappointing race because he had a bit of an alternate strategy, but he just didn't really make up the places as he should. So the team is lacking at least 0.2 from the data that I saw to really fight for wins on a merit basis. They were the fourth quickest team this weekend. They are behind Mercedes, they're behind McLaren and Red Bull. And ultimately, to sum up what I'm saying, they were flattered by Charles Leclerc's incredible lap in qualifying. The fact is they have a lot of work to do, both with the drag of their car, with the mechanical grip of their car in terms of generating tire temps that fall within a certain window. And it's the same old story with Ferrari. Good, but not quite good enough.
I mean, with Sainz, he was one of the few drivers who started on the alternate strategy. So the whole grid was on mediums. Sainz and Joe started on hards. Ricciardo started on softs. I mean, Joe's car died almost immediately. Ricardo, forget about him. Sainz, yeah, very, very long hard stint. He did 21 laps on hards. But then, yeah, because they decided to pit him and just get him out of the way of Lewis instead of using it to block him, he did 8 laps on mediums after that, and then did what was it? And then did a third stint of 15 laps on hards. So they could have run him long, and potentially he could have had a lot of pace near the end. But the only logic I could think of for pitting him that second time when they did is because they thought, oh, he's just going to give DRS to Lewis if we keep him out in this position. But Lewis's top speed was not brilliant. The thing is, there was a chart showing that Leclerc had by far the slowest top speed of everybody in the race. It was like almost 10k slower than the next driver or something. I don't know how accurate the graph was, but it was a huge drop off compared to the rest of the grid. Whereas like Stroll and George, and they had really, really high straight line speed. But the whole situation, it still puzzles me as to why Lewis made the decision to go there. And you wonder now if he's regretting it, because even though yesterday, you know, there's tensions in terms of the decisions made and all of that, he still technically won the race. Mercedes are on a high, things are working again. Ferrari are going backwards again, and he should know more than anyone else that of the people that haven't driven for them yet about the kind of operational errors there are, because they basically gave him 3 championships through it. It's just, I'm left thinking, what does he think's going to happen? That he's going to a team which is borderline incompetent, and he's going there trying to fight to get number 1 status against their chosen one. Like, I don't know what. Maybe like with Checo, there's going to be some other variant on a performance clause, like an anti-performance clause that says, "Oh, you're doing too well, so can I stay now with Mercedes?" I don't know. Maybe he'll consider tearing that up and trying to stay. I don't know.
Yeah,
It's going to ruin his. Oh, go ahead. Nedzo.
Yeah, I think the biggest problem here is the decision of hiring Lewis Hamilton was a decision that was, again, it's both ways. It works with Lewis and with Ferrari as well. I don't think Fred Vasseur had anything to do with Lewis signing for Ferrari. I think it's entirely orchestrated by John Elkann, and you can see it when you see these videos whenever John Elkann actually comes to the paddock. Lewis is hanging out with him a lot. Maybe Lewis thinks that if he can be a bit more, maybe influence the political side to an extent, then he might have an edge on Charles, which he might try to do that. And then there comes the second part. I think what happened with Lewis was he gets disillusioned very quickly. And he got disillusioned at McLaren as well, and I think that worked perfectly for him. He went to Mercedes, and I think he's nailed his career afterwards. Right now, what has happened is he talked to Mercedes during the pre-2023 season. They did not listen to him. They went with their own design philosophy, and it tanked. Lewis did not mince words, went ahead and pretty much announced to the media that I gave my suggestions, they went the other direction. Now, did that end whatever kind of belief Lewis had in the team or not? I'm not sure. Then there is the added factor of the limited contract. Lewis wanted a long-term contract. Toto did not want to give him that. Maybe that also played a role where he did not feel welcome. And when you add all these things up, plus the lure of, I think, almost $100 million per year, that's almost 2.5 times what he's getting paid already. You add all this up, and the legacy, winning with Ferrari does help in that. Maybe that helped him, and ultimately he took the decision. I think he thought that Mercedes was never going to win again, at least until 2026, and maybe at that point in time, because the brain drain from Mercedes has been huge. He made the decision on the basis of that, and I think at this moment he's regretting a lot. Even though he might be winning a few races this season, he knows where he's going, and he's also looking at the fact that some mind-numbing strategies has been put in place by Ferrari for Charles Leclerc. And if he's already angry at Mercedes for a strategy that was orchestrated by his teammate, imagine what's going to happen at Ferrari. Where, rest assured, there will be a few strategies which will not make any sense.
Nedzo, did you want to chime in here? If not, I'm happy to go.
Yeah, I've not really got any much to say. I can't really respond to that.
Yeah, and I don't blame you, mate, because there's just not a whole lot else to add, is there? I mean, at the end of the day, I think, sum it up, I do think it was fundamentally a marketing-driven decision to hire Lewis Hamilton. And Lewis is going to lose his trademark phrase. I've been at Mercedes since I was 13. Can't say that anymore. He loves saying that at every single conference. He loves bringing that up. It's like, okay, cool. Like, we know you've been at Mercedes since you were 13 because you talk about it all the time, mate. What are you going to say? I've been trashing Ferrari since I've been 13. Like, I don't really know how he's going to spin that at Ferrari. Like, I'm the new guy here. But what Lewis doesn't understand is that Italian culture, the Ferrari way of doing things, if we look at other drivers that have gone there and judge based off their comments, is far less precise and not as, I hate using this word, like good as the teams he's been at. He's been at Mercedes and McLaren, and they're both notorious for being, obsessive over perfecting driver setup, being very technically proficient. First with Ron Dennis, then with Toto Wolff. So great leadership all around. I don't think he understands what a challenge is going to be. And I don't think Lewis will be happy if he's just a marketing face there. I think he's really underestimated the difference in culture and engineering skill. Let's just take a step back and also look at the societies in which these teams originate from. It's kind of a dark secret, both in Italy, and I lived in Italy for many years. I actually grew up there for the first 7 years of my life. It's actually a dark secret in Italy that, the way that the Ferrari team is run from a talent perspective, hiring talent, is not the same as the way like Mercedes or McLaren is run or Red Bull is run, in that they're looking for the best engineers at those, let me say, Anglo-Saxon driven teams. It's a very meritocratic process in which they'll go to all the best schools and they'll pick the most talented engineers. It just so happens that most of those engineers happen to be, from British schools because they have a great passion and emphasis on the mechanical engineering programs that train people for F1 properly. Ferrari comes from an Italian culture of, I dare say, nepotism. Many of the Ferrari engineers are not considered to be the best in the business. You don't see these guys at other teams. One or two of them, yes, but generally, Ferrari's best engineers are not going to be considered the best engineers at the other Anglo-Saxon teams. And that's a real problem, and it's something they still haven't addressed. That and again, like I've spoken about this before, and I think many people agree with me. It's more about who your father was, or how rich you were, or who you know inside the team, than it is how good you are at Ferrari when it comes to hiring personnel. And that'll always result in being just a little bit behind the other teams, no matter how big your budget is. There's a real cultural issue at Ferrari that I don't think Vasseur can address. It needs to come at a deep level from within, starting with John Elkann. And I don't think that's going to happen. So, yeah, I think Lewis will be frustrated there, unless Ferrari somehow ace these regulations in 2026 and have such a massive advantage that they can get away with operational errors. But that remains to be seen.
I can say, as someone who was on an engineering course, I can vouch for British institutions being very good at that sort of stuff. I went to the university that had the biggest amount of graduates that went to Formula One teams. Like literally all of the graphs and statistical data suggest that the university I went to, Oxford Brookes, had the highest percentages, the highest overall numbers, the highest everything of people who went to people who went to Formula One teams after their university studies. And I wasn't a bad student. I knew the stuff. I was good at the engineering, like the car setup parts. I know how car setup works. It was just the math stuff that I couldn't get. But even me, who I'd say was a decent student, scraped through with 40% in some of my subjects and modules. That's just about a pass. And I'm a good student. Everything I've done before and since has been at a high level. Like for example, literally at my university this year, I got 95% on one of my modules. So I know it's not a me problem. Yeah, engineering is tough. It's nerdy, it's tough, it's got maths in it. I'm not sure what it's like in Italy. I know that one of my lecturer's assistants was from Italy. His name was Alessio. He was awful. He didn't know how to teach. He expected everyone to know things as level 4s. So literally the first year of university, expected you to know stuff that he'd known for 30 years. Yeah. And yeah, I assume what you're saying is true. Lewis does need the team around him to help him. This is what I've always said. Lewis, when things are perfect, Lewis Hamilton is one of the greatest drivers in Formula One history. But when there is 1, 2, or 3, or however many things awry, he falters and he struggles. Whether it's the car, whether it's the team making errors, whether it's him making errors, he just falls by the wayside and turns into just a regular 1-time, 2-time champion like a Jenson Button or a Nico Rosberg. I think that he's gonna, and he's also gonna be a struggle. Like British drivers going to Ferrari. The last British driver we had at Ferrari, apart from Behrman, was Eddie Irvine. Eddie Irvine, before he went to Ferrari, was a young prospect, not on the level of Schumacher when he joined at the same time as Schumacher, but he was a good driver, and people saw him as a crash-prone but good option. He got a chance at a title and bottled it due to his own incompetence and due to losing out to Mika Hakkinen, who crashed every fucking 5 seconds in 1999. Nigel Mansell went up against Alain Prost. To be fair, Alain Prost is probably the greatest driver in terms of political mangling and getting teams to do what he wants to do and alienating his teammate. That's what Alain Prost was known for. And Nigel Mansell, most likely knowing Nige, was too arrogant to try and learn the language, to try and integrate with the team. He was just going to, as David Coulthard said, bugger off to the golf course after a testing session. The last properly good British Ferrari driver was John Surtees. Obviously, that was the 60s. That is 60 years ago. I like, unless we get this situation where we do have, because like back in the 50s and 60s, it was normal to see British Ferrari drivers, Mike Hawthorne, Peter Collins. Just in general, British drivers going to other teams was a lot more common then than it is now. It's not as bad as it is in football, for example, where you very rarely see British footballers go to foreign teams because we've got the classic island mentality of we are the best. We all speak English. We don't want to learn anything else that isn't what we know, which is stupid. I can tell you, because I know 3 languages, that it's actually better, and it's better to learn cultures, and it's better to be more socially understanding towards people. And yeah, Lewis is going to struggle to adapt at Ferrari. He's going to struggle to deal with, like you said, the operational differences. He's going to struggle to deal with the new culture. It's a lot more. I think Italy, you can back me up on this or not and tell me if I'm wrong, Ciaron, but from what I know, especially recently, Italy is a lot more conservative than the United Kingdom in terms of political. They're a lot less liberal, if you were to quote the nutty American right-wing people. I think I've seen a lot of people on Twitter saying that Lewis is going to try and introduce all his diversity quotas at Ferrari. I don't think that's going to be the case. He's going to be there for like 2 years. He's not going to want to restructure the entire team for his Mission 44, and obviously Mission 44 is a UK thing. But yeah, I like, don't get me wrong. I think it would be fairy tale, and as someone who is training to be a journalist, I think that would be a perfect storyline. Lewis Hamilton goes to Ferrari, wins an 8th title. Perfect storyline. But I don't think it's going to happen. I think if he does beat Leclerc, it'll be marginally. And if he doesn't beat Leclerc, it will be a good thing for people who don't like Lewis Hamilton to say, he didn't beat Charles Leclerc. He didn't beat a guy who we may never know if he ever wins a title.
Because of experimental setups. Anyways,
Yes.
just one thing. Calling Eddie Irvine British is probably not going to go down well with Eddie. But that might be something. Because one of my fellow podcasts, just to add context, my fellow podcast is Irish, and if you call him British, he gets riled up to a certain extent.
He was Northern Irish though in his career, not Republic of Ireland.
He's still, there's still an element of it. I actually asked him. I'd asked my Jason Hassett is the guy, and I asked him if Northern Irish are more fine with it. That probably not. Probably try not to bring it up. So maybe that is the case. Anyways,
British Isles instead of British.
What we know. Yeah, go ahead, Peter.
This is why in the Olympics we have Team GB and not Team UK, because Northern Irish athletes can choose to represent either Team GB or Team Ireland.
Yeah. Anyways,
Yeah, well,
it's a complete sidebar.
Yeah.
Sorry to bring it up.
Sorry.
I think the biggest problem with the entire thing is going to be that what Lewis had in mind was the fact that Fred had joined the team and there were positive signs coming in place. But the sad reality is that the team is still controlled by a John Elkann or a Benedetto Vigna, who are uh, trying to control the team from the boardroom. You should never try to do that in Formula One, and that is something that has always hampered Ferrari. It should have been left to Fred Vasseur to ultimately take calls that would actually help the team grow and help mold it in a direction that is actually positive and maybe a little less Italian. Ferrari last time when Ferrari won and dominated the sport, it was not in essence an Italian team because it was led by a French guy and one of the biggest masterminds was a British and the driver was German. So that is something that tends to help Ferrari. This is not happening right now. Okay, again, the French guy is leading the team, but everyone else that is actually, you can say, defining the culture of the team is still keeping it the same Ferrari that has basically sucked since 2008. So just maybe the next 2 seasons we are going to see a lot of things. It's going to be a PR disaster for for Ferrari, to be honest, because if you've seen what has happened with Mercedes this season, that ridiculous mail that was written by a fan and the kind of PR backlash that Toto Wolff and rest have gotten, Ferrari, be prepared for a lot of things that are not desirable, to be honest.
Okay, so I have a quick interjection, super quick, and then Peter, I'll pass it on to you. Okay, so part of the problem here, though, is that people are benchmarking Ferrari with the glory years and saying, "Oh yeah, when they had Jean Todt and all these non-Italians, they were winning. So spaghetti management doesn't work." So yes, I think Michael was the best. I actually think that 2002 that Ferrari team of that era, looking back, is overrated, and I'll tell you why. Every single weekend, they could go back to Firano and test, while other teams couldn't. They had their own private test track, and Bridgestone were exclusively designing tires for Michael Schumacher at the time. They had all the cards in their favor. It would be a mistake for Ferrari to look at that team with the current regulations now and say, "Oh well, because everybody there was like French and British, that like we couldn't." If you had put an Italian team boss, in my opinion, with the the technical expertise that Ross Brown, Rory Brown brought in that rules environment, I really think they would have still won those titles. I really don't think they would have. They had such an advantage with their private test track that nobody wants to acknowledge. Like
Yeah, but
every single
sorry.
weekend, they could take the car back to Fiorano, and the other teams couldn't. And when I look back, I grew up on that era, right? I grew up watching every race. That era was actually complete BS when it came to fairness between the teams because Ferrari had such an advantage that they could test again, like any single day that they wanted, they could do a private test. Obviously, they're going to find like 1 or 2 tenths when nobody else can even test that entire week. How's that fair? And how is that comparable to the situation we have now? Ferrari needs to, I think, get out of this mindset of like, oh, like we need to copy the golden age of the team. Well, no, you had a lot of things in your favor back then that are never coming back. Casual, what do you think?
Yeah, but the thing is, those circumstances and those conditions were curated by the team, right? A Ross Brawn or a Rory Byrne was signed by a Jean Todt and persuaded by Michael Schumacher. It was not a case of a team being developed. It was not a case of this all these assets being handed down to Ferrari. Just for instance, since
Yeah.
1980, I think it was 1980 or 1981 when Jody Scheckter won the championship with Ferrari.
79.
79,
79,
79.
79. Since 1979 till 2000, Ferrari did not win a drivers' championship. And the reason behind that was not the fact that they did not have Bridgestone tires or they did not have a private test track. The reason was they had X number of resources, they did not put them to correct use. It's like
Well,
having a superpower, but they did not efficiently use it. Even right now, again, it's unfair. I agree with you, it's unfair. But who curated these circumstances? Toyota is known as a brand that basically put a fuck ton of money in Formula One and went off and won jack shit. Why? Because they had the resources, they could not put it in the right places. Ferrari had the resources, Ferrari put them in the right places, and they won. That's how it is supposed
Yeah.
to be. And that's what they did. You can't, I mean, just look at that. Since 1979, we are in 2024. How many years? That's 45 years. In
Yeah.
those 45
Yeah.
years, there's only been a decade where Ferrari has succeeded. That's it. And that decade was by a team which made the most of its whatever it had at its disposal. And that's how it should be.
Nedzo, jump in.
Yeah, but I'll say one slight point. Like, although Ferrari didn't win a drivers' championship for those 21 years, they did
won a
win the constructors. What did you say?
I said
They won the
I was saying the
constructors.
same thing. Yeah, they won it once.
Yeah, they won the constructors' championship in '83 with Rene Arnoux and Patrick Tambay. I think
Oh, God, that year. Yeah.
I think that in '83 they had the fastest car. They had, again, I think what McLaren have now. They have a really fast car, but they don't have the fast drivers to back it up. Like Rene Arnoux, fantastic qualifier, beat Alain Prost very regularly in qualifying, has 20 or something pole positions, despite only having like 5 race wins. It might even be like less than that. And Patrick Tambay was another great driver, came into Ferrari in 1982, probably the most tumultuous season of their history since the 50s, when all their drivers were dying every 5 seconds. And in '82, their drivers were falling like stones. And he came in and won. I think it was his second race in Hockenheim. Like, they had 2 drivers that were very capable, but weren't really championship caliber. If, for example, Didier Pironi hadn't have fucked off his legs in Hockenheim in '82, I think that Ferrari could have won the '83 title.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay, so to kind of recap on the past 30 minutes, first of all, I think I need to come to Eddie Irvine's defense a little bit, because for the first half of '99, he was not contending for the title and he wasn't planning to be. He was then thrown into that position when Schumacher breaks his leg, and I think he drove exceptionally for the rest of that season within his capabilities. And what happened in the Nürburgring was just a travesty, and it was helped by Hakkinen putting on one of the worst title campaigns ever, but still, I think he did very well within the parameters that he was within. Also, when you say the words industriousness or engineering efficiency to me, Italy is not the first country that comes to mind. I mean, a Ferrari or a Lamborghini or a Pagani, okay, it's very pretty, it's sculpted lovely, and it's built with passion in this like pristine factory surrounded by vineyards and olive trees and all of that. But it will fall to pieces if you so much as look at it, and you can pull the dashboard off with your bare hands. Contrast that with Germany, or Britain, where it's this like mucky, smoky factory somewhere in the Rust Belt. And the car, it's maybe not the best looking thing in the world. It's quite uniform, but it's a good workhorse. It'll keep working for forever. I mean, because Enzo Ferrari, he loved to disparage what he called the garagistas, because they were mucky and were building things in, garden sheds and all of that. But they were beating him for most of that period as well. So for Lewis to switch from Mercedes to Ferrari, that's quite a contrast in outlooks. It's not going to be fun for him, because they're probably going to build a car that doesn't work for his driving style. He's going to do his usual passive, oh, tell me what the strategy is, and then complain when it's a stupid one, which it will be. The diversity initiatives, I think he is trying to push for that. I mean, he's spoken about it directly, that he's already trying to get that going through. There will be a lot of resistance because Ferrari are just very stuffy and all of that. But also, I think in terms of Italian culture, I don't think they're going to appreciate saying, oh, we need to make our, flagship Italian manufacturer less Italian. I don't think that's going to go down well. And but then part of me thinks there is some kind of logic in it, because the last time that Ferrari actually did well and nailed the regulations was when they had no Italians in their senior staff and none of their drivers were Italian, except Luca Badoer, if that counts. So it's like, but that's kind of my 2 cents on that.
I only have one rebuttal to that. Your Irvine point about how he wasn't in the fight for the title, he wasn't in the fight for the title for the first half of the season. After Silverstone, him and Schumacher were equal on points.
Okay. Where did he finish in Silverstone?
I think it was either third or second. It wasn't a win.
Right. Okay. Okay. Well, that's 6 points, but whatever. But yeah, he was okay. The mentality, he was the second driver, and he owned it. He wasn't like Checo or the other or Bottas, where they pretend they're fighting for championships at the beginning of the season. He knew his place, and yeah, he did very well and came very close. It would have been a bit of a hollow one because it's like I think everyone can agree that had Schumacher not broken his legs, he would have won that title probably very comfortably. But yeah, I think it was a good performance anyway.
Yeah, Schumacher came back in Malaysia and was instantly a second quicker than Irvine in qualifying. I think that pretty much sums that up.
Yeah.
I think that was just him showing what he is, to be honest. That was Schumacher coming back
Showing
and
off.
pretty much, putting the cat amongst the pigeons.
Mm.
That
Yeah,
was
well,
really
first of
funny.
all, that Ferrari was illegal. So, I mean, people like to
that story is
19
so hilarious, by the way. If you measure it this way and not measure it this way, the way Ross Brown went around the regulations.
Well, wasn't that only illegal for the last 2 races?
Yeah, but for Malaysia, it was completely illegal, and that thing was a rocket ship in those races. Like, it's not true that Hakkinen had some rocket ship because Adrian Newey, any car Adrian Newey builds now, they like, oh, it's a Newey rocket ship, so of course it should win. Not true. Newey has on multiple occasions built horrible cars. Not often, of course, but on multiple occasions, and many times his cars have been only merely joint best or even slightly behind those of, for example, Aldo Costa or Rory Byrne. And in '99, that Ferrari was definitely the quickest car in Malaysia. And yes, Michael did a sensational job because he was the best driver in F1. But let's also understand that he had a very quick car in '99, and I actually think Eddie had a car to win the title. It's not that Eddie was fighting against a much quicker McLaren. That thing could have won the title. Eddie was not even quicker than Mika Salo in Hockenheim, and that's kind of unacceptable. So Eddie did a good job, but he should have done a better job. I mean, what was he doing at Nürburgring? Rallying? I mean, what was that all about? He just completely lost it in the final laps when he had to stay in front of Hakkinen, and he lost composure. It's that infamous lockup, as you know, going into that final chicane. So Eddie did a good job. I respect Eddie a lot. He was mentally very tough. That's why Ferrari signed him over Rubens initially. And I like Eddie Irvine. I think he's underrated. Talented driver, absolutely. But he had the tools to do it. And in what was the best season I ever watched, 1999, in a season I'll just wrap up here. Everybody was making constant mistakes. He just made a little bit more, I guess, in the end than Mika. To your point, yes, Ferrari was all Germanic, French, Anglo-Saxon, whatever you want to call it at that time. But I also think that, what they pulled behind the scenes back then would not fly today. So they need to think about balancing, yes, the Italianness with meritocracy. I think that's the takeaway. Put the best people in the positions that they deserve and balance that with an Italian, let's say, ethos. Don't go in one direction or the other. Otherwise, you won't be happy and you probably won't achieve your goals. But that remains to be seen. Bottom line, Ferrari has too much nepotism right now. It's still not being run properly.
You just have to wonder why Adrian Newey has not agreed to a deal.
Doesn't want
sitting there.
Doesn't want the commute, I suppose, from Buckinghamshire to Maranello. Probably doesn't fancy that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, they would have basically given him the keys to Maranello. The way he was quoted this time around, they gave him a driver contract. To be honest,
he's probably exhausted. I mean, he turns 65 this year or 66 this year. He's probably just done at this point, having to completely upend his life in a brand new team and the commute. I don't know if they would let him work remotely like they did with John Barnard because that didn't really work out so well.
I'm just surprised he's still taking part in races in Monaco. Watching him do that at 65, 66 is stunning. If he still has his reflexes in place, that's impressive.
That's actually not uncommon in sports like NASCAR. The oldest NASCAR driver in history drove in 2014, Morgan Shepherd. He drove at the age of 77 in an actual NASCAR race.
Emerson Fittipaldi still races, and he's in his 70s.
Yeah,
he does some stuff occasionally.
Yeah.
Fucking Mario Andretti's still driving F1 cars, and he's in his 80s now.
Yeah. Emerson Fittipaldi was
I think
competitive in
Sterling Moss
IndyCar
also did
into his
that, right?
50s.
Yeah, that's true.
Anyway, so we mentioned Adrian Newey. He works for Red Bull. Let's move on to Red Bull because we're 2 hours in and we've covered 3 teams. So this is kind of a crunch point for them because now, well, for Max, without the penalty, he probably would have won this race. I think the one thing we've learned is that their car is insane in the wet. I mean, he got, pole by 6/10. Checo was saying, "Oh, I'm back because I've qualified third." It's like, yes, you've qualified third, but you're nearly a second behind your teammate. Max goes from 11th to 4th in the end, so not quite what we've seen in the last 2 years. He can't carve through the field anymore. But Checo went from 2nd to 7th, and now, yeah, that must be the death knell. I think we know it's coming in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, I think it is bye-bye for Checo. I mean, if I was Red Bull, I'd put Yuki in that car, so it's not as big of a transition as it would be for like Lawson. Put Lawson in the AlphaTauri, bin off Ricciardo at the end of the season, bring Iwasa in, or Big Nose if he wins the F2 title. That's it. That's it. Get rid of the guys who either weren't part of a Red Bull family or have decided to rejoin the Red Bull family after being out for however long, for 10 years out of a junior program and 5 out of the actual team. Yeah, just do that and all will be happy. Dandelions will start growing. Disabled people will jump up out of their wheelchairs, all that sort of stuff.
It's going to be Netflix though, because we saw yesterday that we need that we saw Ricciardo chatting with Horner and Laurent Mekies after the race, and then walking off with Horner, and then apparently him and Max got the same helicopter away from the circuit photographed together. So it's just going to end up being Ricciardo. Like they're not going to. They shouldn't give it to Lawson. They should put him in the V car. But it's not fair to put him in the Red Bull after only 5 races. But they should give Tsunoda a go. But yeah, he's just become a kind of he drove really well in Hungary. He was kind of invisible, and then he was just nowhere in the race today. But yeah, it's going to be Ricciardo.
Yeah, and we can watch him flounder there and then get fucked off at the end of the season, hopefully.
I don't know. I mean, it's difficult to read. I don't see why or how that's going to benefit them in any way, replacing Perez for the rest of the season. I don't think Ricciardo would do much better. Maybe he would. But it sounds like from the quotes Christian Horner made after the race that they're committed to helping Checo, but people lie in Formula One all the time, so it's a bit difficult to read. In terms of the race for Red Bull, for Max, he started so far down. Otherwise, yeah, he probably could have won this race. But it was just tough with the 2 mediums and the hard tire, that strategy that they used. I think if they had started on the hard tire, probably would have done a better job. But nobody anticipated the one stop in the hard tire being so effective this weekend. So overall, it was a solid recovery, I'd say, by Max. But he beat his teammate. But both Red Bulls just didn't, I think, finish where they expected to finish. I think everyone expected Max to maybe make it to the podium. And I think with Perez, nobody expected him to drop off the way he did. Right? They didn't really have a pace advantage, in my opinion, in the race. And I think Max is just a very good driver around this track. So he probably, at times, was even, maybe going beyond the limits of the car, if that makes any sense. That finally, I'll say this much, that people asking like, okay, so why did Perez drop down the order? Well, I think when he was on that medium tire in the second stint, when everybody else was on the hard tire, he just he didn't have the ability to push hard, right? He was losing pace, and in the final stint, he had just lost so much time. Yes, he set the fastest lap, which was impressive in a way, but it was just too little, too late. He doesn't have any comfort in this car. He doesn't have any understanding of this car. It definitely doesn't suit his driving style. But he's not making progress, and this is the key. You can have some tough races. You can complain about the car's handling, but you need to be making incremental improvements to show the team that you're on the path or on the right path to getting to an acceptable level of performance. Ricardo wasn't showing that at McLaren, and they dropped him. What worries me is that Perez isn't showing this at Red Bull, and they may drop him. And it would be a travesty because actually Ricardo doesn't deserve to drive a race-winning car. He just doesn't. He hasn't performed. He hasn't shown maturity. He just smiles in front of the camera, and people just gobble it up because they like, his character. It's not what Formula One's about. It's about racing. It's about the best in the world. And it would be a travesty if Ricardo got that seat. He absolutely does not deserve it. And it doesn't matter if he goes in and performs. He hasn't shown enough to be given that opportunity. There's so many drivers that could perform in a car like that. Why would you give it to a driver that just hasn't shown any kind of top-level performance over the past half decade in Formula One? That's my take on it.
Okay, now there are two ways to look at it. Keeping the Red Bull performance aside, I think we've talked a bit about it. There are two approaches. First is, what do you think Red Bull is going to do? I think mostly all of us are in agreement that it seems that Daniel is going to get the seat after the summer break. It's more or less done. It wouldn't have been if Tsunoda did not have a 60 to 80 place, whatever that penalty was, and he was more competitive, and you could see a real competitive picture between the two drivers. It would have been more interesting to see if Daniel beats Tsunoda this weekend. Then maybe you could make the argument a bit more legit. Regardless, he's getting the seat. Keeping that aside, let's assume you're Christian Horner or Helmut Marko, whichever suits you. To be honest, at this stage, I don't think you'd want to be either of them. But if you are one of those two guys and you're making the decision, what would you like to do with the entire Red Bull driver dynamics at this stage?
I mean, this is like an interesting question, but at the same time, it's so obvious. None of these drivers are good. It's like saying, do I want to eat undercooked fish or undercooked beef or a raw egg? You're going to get sick. It's trash. And the bottom line is, if I was a team principal right now, this is how crazy the situation is. I would hire Fernando Alonso in that Red Bull car because I'm sick of this. Like, Max Verstappen has had the most incredibly incompetent host of teammates who just cannot adapt to oversteer on corner entry. And the theory is that, Ricardo could, so let's bring him back. If that's your reasoning, why don't we bring back Nigel Mansell or Kimi Räikkönen? If it's just oversteer on entry that you think is going to suit Ricardo, they're quicker drivers than that smiling clown in F1 history. And it's you see, lads, society is predicated on meritocracy. We perform and we are rewarded. Things are not given to us. That's the beauty of living, in certain places. And I think that's the beauty of a good society. Red Bull is acting like a teenage, like a high school teenage girl that, only wants to invite certain girls to her party because she likes them. I don't know where on earth I was going with that metaphor because that actually doesn't work at all. But my point is that Ricardo is being favored, in my opinion, because he's marketable and he has a very good relationship with Horner. Think about what message that sounds. That's my belief. Okay, I'm going to stop there. What do you think?
No, I agree with I agree with the fact that you want to put Fernando Alonso in, because last week when I was discussing this on my pod, that was the name that popped into my head as well. What will you do with RB though, the second team racing, whatever the fuck that name is?
I would question, and David Coulthard made this point on a podcast. And again, I don't think Fernando Alonso even necessarily deserves that seat, but the reason I'm saying that is an Alonso or an Ocon would probably adapt to that car and fearlessly challenge Max. You can't tell those drivers what to do. And I actually think it would also guarantee a constructor's title. But to your question, I question this Red Bull driver program. I question it. I question everything that it's ever achieved. Do you really think that Sebastian Vettel was the most important component of those Red Bull titles? And Peter's not going to like what I'm about to say, so buckle up.
Neither am I.
But do you really think he was the most important component of those Red Bull titles? Look at the technical team that that was present at Red Bull, it was stacked, led by Adrian Newey and a whole host of other beasts. And I would argue that the most important driver in Red Bull's history was David Coulthard. He took McLaren's technology and he convinced Newey to jump ship to join Red Bull. It was that moment where Red Bull suddenly got an influx of McLaren technology, McLaren's steering wheel, which Martin Whitmarsh foolishly allowed David Coulthard to take to Red Bull, and convinced Newey that this was a better option than McLaren at the time. That set in stone what was the strongest technical team in F1 for decades, and maybe still is. You put Kimi Räikkönen in 2009 in that Red Bull. You put Fernando Alonso in that Red Bull. You put Lewis Hamilton in that Red Bull. Maybe even Kubica. That's debatable. They would have dominated that title. Vettel was not at the level in those years. He was making a lot of mistakes, and it was being covered up by a monster of a car. And so it wasn't that the Red Bull driver program was producing these game-changing drivers, in my opinion. I think it was because the technical team was strong. And my point here, to answer your question, what would you do with RB? I think RB just takes resources away from the main team. I think the main team would be even better if they just shut down the Red Bull. This is not like the Barcelona Academy that produced Messi. And Messi is Messi. Messi was driving Barcelona over Xavi and Iniesta, but because they didn't win anything with Xavi and Iniesta, apart from one Champions League before. It was a good team before Messi joined and became the linchpin, but it wasn't the team that we saw under Guardiola and Messi afterwards. Anyways, back to F1. They would never have won a title without Adrian Newey. There's just no doubt about it. He was the linchpin of that. It wasn't Helmut Marko's driver academy. It wasn't Sebastian Vettel. It wasn't Christian Horner. It was Newey. Okay, and so I actually think RB is becoming a bit of a. It's a strange team. Like, yes, they can test things there, and yes, it gives them some leverage in terms of controlling another team on the grid. But I don't actually think it's even that necessary. So I wouldn't really be too concerned about that. I'm sure there's a young driver they can slot in there, like Isaac Hadjar or somebody else. But all in all, they need to focus on the first team, and they need to focus on putting the two best possible drivers in that team. A Carlos Sainz, a Fernando Alonso, even an Esteban Ocon would have been good. And they're going down the wrong path, putting someone that they think, was good in the past, or that they like, or that is popular, at the expense of current performance. So that's how I look at it.
Ned's.
Yeah, I was about to say, the only reason the Red Bull Junior team even exists in Formula One is because of Minardi. Because when Minardi went bust, F1 were like, we need was it an 11th or a 10th team at that point? It was 11th, wasn't it? We need to have this 11th team. Yeah, we need to have this 11th team. What are we going to do? And then they're like, Red Bull, can you buy it out because you have a lot of money, and you just make it your second team because you have a junior? Because they were one of the first F1 outfits to actually have an official junior program. It wasn't until like Stoffel Van Dorn in 2013 was McLaren's first junior, and Pascal Wehrlein in 2014 was Mercedes' first junior. No other team.
Wasn't Magnussen the first McLaren junior?
There were McLaren development drivers from like 2010, but not like a proper program. Ferrari, their first FDA junior was Jules Bianchi in 2009.
Yeah.
Red Bull were ahead of the game in that vein, so I assume that's why they did it. McLaren wanted to get ProDrive on the grid as a B team for 2008, didn't they? But they got rejected because it was a B team, even though Red Bull already had a B team on the grid, which is confusing. It's just politics. But yeah, there was a chance that Gary Paffett could have been on the F1 grid, which would have been interesting. But yeah, I think VCARB / AlphaTauri / Toro Rosso / Minardi, whatever you want to call it, has run its course. Of all the drivers that have raced in Toro Rosso, only a handful of them have ever won a race. Only 2 of them have ever won a championship. You look at the drivers, you've got the likes of Buemi, Al-Jaswari, Verne, those who deserve the second chance but never got one. It's what's the point of a junior team if you're going to take those drivers who are good but aren't particularly spectacular? like, as I said, Buemi, El Joshua, Verne. You've got the likes of Kvyat, fantastic. Did a fantastic season at Red Bull. Got dropped because of a few bad races. You've got the likes of Ricardo dropped himself. Gasly had a shit season. Albon was okay, but because Red Bull are always striving for more. Red Bull are always striving for more. That's why they got rid of Albon. Albon wasn't horrendous, but he wasn't fantastic either. He was too average for Red Bull to really step up their game. So that's why they went for Perez. And I think now we've realised that Red Bull second seat, we thought it was cursed with Albon and Gasly. It's cursed whoever you put in there, really. They're never going to perform as well as Verstappen in his team and his car. Like, it's like going into Schumacher's Ferrari. It's like going into Prost and Senna's McLaren. It's like going into those sort of teams where there is such a monopoly in terms of drivers and the lead driver. I do believe that whoever you put in that second seat, they're not going to perform as well as Verstappen. But someone like Alonso, someone like, maybe not, I think Ocon maybe not. I mean, he's aggressive, but I think he'd get too much. I think he'd lose his temper too much. Maybe someone like Sainz would drive them towards that constructors title, because I think they could do what Benetton did in 1994, which is have one driver smashing it all at the front of the pack, but then you've got JJ Leto and Jos Verstappen getting one third place between them and getting a total, like, throughout 1994, Schumacher had like 92 points. His teammates combined had 11 points. Like, you don't want to have that. You want to win the constructors title, because if Red Bull don't get a good driver in that car from Belgium onwards, even if McLaren bottle the Drivers' Championship, they could easily cruise through and get the constructors, because they're getting two guys on the podium every single race, and Red Bull aren't.
And what will you do with RB? You want to sell it off? Ideally.
Sell it off Andretti, High Tech, whoever wants to get it. I say we should have 11 or 12 teams on the grid anyway, but don't get me wrong, I like the idea of it. If you had two merited drivers, Lawson, Oasa, I mean, even Hadjar, even though I hate him and I think he's an absolute cunt and doesn't know how to treat people nicely and not go no every 5 seconds. I think that
He's a pain in the ass, I agree.
Yeah, but he is quick. I mean, he's not as good as Paul Aron or any of those guys who aren't in the Red Bull Driver Academy. But yeah, he's a good driver. If they had two of those drivers in there, like Tsunoda, he's good, but I think if you're not going to promote him to Red Bull either this year or next year, he's run his course. Get him out, get Lawson or the Oasa in, or Hadjar. Because if Hadjar wins this F2 title, which is looking ever more likely as much as Paul Aron keeps bottling his consistent form, I think that you should put Hadjar with Lawson in that 2025 car if you aren't going to put someone like Alonso or someone who's better than Lawson in that 2025 Red Bull seat. It's just like, if you're going to have VCarb / AlphaTauri, use it as a junior team. If you're not going to use it as a junior team, fuck it off and get someone else who actually wants to run an F1 team like Andretti.
Aaron?
Yeah, I can jump in quickly. So, totally agree with those points. And I just want to add another thing. Is it good for Formula One to have these subservient teams on the grid? These B teams? Is this even good for racing? I mean, we don't want to have teams that we know will move over for the parent team. We want 11 competitive teams that have unrestricted ability to race each other as well. And the more we go down this path of B teams, I think the worse the racing becomes. And we become in a very almost monopoly-like environment for Formula One teams. And I think that's totally unacceptable. So on that premise alone, I'd like to see all these B teams, flounder and just leave. And before I hand it over back to Nedzo, I want to say one thing.
Yeah.
You expect me to have any faith in this Red Bull Driver Academy program that's led by Helmut Marko? This guy thought Enrique Bernoldi was a better driver than the great Kimi Räikkönen. Just let that sink in. He thought Peter Sauber rigged the Sauber cars to favor Kimi over Bernoldi. I'm sorry. I don't care if 20, 30, 40 years passes. I will never, ever trust anyone who is that unbelievably deluded. How'd Bernoldi do, Helmut? How'd he do? Exactly, mate. Nedzo, back to you.
I was trying to remember what my point was. Oh yeah, I do remember my point. It's going back to your football analogy. You talked about Messi, Iniesta, and Xavi. Teams like the second Barcelona team, they aren't allowed, even if they were to get promoted from a second division, they aren't allowed to play in the first division of whatever league they're in. They're not like Man United's B team, even though I don't think they have one. But the B teams, like what's the Real Madrid one, is La Camisa or something stupid like that. They're not allowed to be in the top division. Like, obviously, as much as F2 is an absolute shit show nowadays in terms of drivers not getting promoted, the Mechachrome engines being Mechachrome engines, and it's like they're basically reinventing Bernie Eccleston's lottery system from 2009 as to whether you're going to blow up or not. I do, yeah. Like, if you're gonna have a junior team, use it in F2. Put all the resources in F2 where you have Hadjar, you have Fittipaldi who's running Red Bull Colours, you have this is where Peter's newest or one of his recent videos comes in, where you can list you all of the F2 drivers and F3 drivers. Put the resources into those guys. Whoever's good, promote them into the F1 team. Whoever's bad, don't promote them into the F1 team. Simple as that.
Peter, what's your take? I mean, I still remember you calling Daniel a cockroach that does not go away.
So in the past 23 years, the Red Bull Junior team has signed 102 drivers. 19 of them have made it to Formula One. All but 3 of them did so with Red Bull. The 3 that didn't were Patrick Friesacker, Narain Karsakayan, and Karun Chandhok, who most people don't even realise used to be Red Bull Juniors. So that's a hit rate of 15% in terms of getting drivers up. I mean, in the past 10 years, they have been a bit more selective, because in the first 10 years they were getting any old sod signed up to the team, and a lot of people that no one have heard, drivers that nobody's heard of, ones that got kicked from the team after 1 year, and then just retired from racing and didn't do anything. There was one driver, Lewis Williamson. He lasted 2 races, I think, or 5 races with Red Bull, and then got dropped. So he was there. He was on the junior team for like 2 months or something. So it's kind of hit and miss. I mean, yeah, he's Helmut Marko makes some interesting choices of juniors, and they've had things in the past that a lot of investment went into Buemi and Al-Jaswari. They were both pretty good as in their junior careers, and then they did 2.5, 3 years fairly decent at Toro Rosso, and then both get booted for Ricciardo and Verne. Ricciardo obviously makes it to the big team. Then Verne gets screwed over twice, first for Ricciardo and then for Kvyat, and then loses his Toro Rosso seat. But in terms of how it is now, what they should do, and because I'm interested in preserving the integrity of having this junior team and the sort of high turnaround, and well, first of all, don't call it RB anymore, just call it Toro Rosso again. And then, well, you fire Checo and he gets banished back to Mexico. You fire Ricciardo and he gets banished back to Hollywood, I guess. Tsunoda's had 5 years as a junior, which in the junior team, which is the longest stint anyone's had so far. Put him in the seat. He can flop after a year, and then you banish him to Japan to race in Super Formula. Liam Lawson and Isaac Hadjar then go in the lower one. After Tsunoda's banished, you put Liam Lawson up. Hadjar, he does his thing, however he does, and then I guess you take on Iwasa or maybe Arvid Lindblad if he storms his way through Formula 2, one of the other current juniors. But you just keep the cycle going, and then either Max Sadies happens or he just quits, and then Liam Lawson becomes the senior. You just keep the turnaround. You don't keep clogging it up with drivers who are either fossils or were never involved in Red Bull to begin with, because it's not like when they had Webber and Coulthard for a while, because they needed experienced people to help get them into a rhythm, and that was before it was like a title contending team. I want more teams to sort of to honor their junior teams a bit more and preserve them, because at the moment the driver turnaround is low because of the lack of teams, but also a lot of juniors are just not getting opportunities when they should. And so it's like, if you're gonna put them in these junior programs, the whole point is that they move up to F1 eventually, and they don't just become a ghost like Drogovic has become, because at least with Jack Doohan at Alpine, they're being reasonably proactive with giving him simulator time and all of that. Frederick Vesti, I think he's still a Mercedes junior, but everyone's forgotten about him completely now. The Williams one, well, it's a competition. Well, I mean, it'll either be Antonelli or maybe Franco Colapinto could take over from Sargent. But yeah, if you're going to have these junior teams, just kind of stick by them and actually make them worth being in.
Yeah, I think I Mostly, I agree with you on the fact. I don't understand why Williams has a junior team. They're pretty much not interested in promoting Colapinto. I mean, a back market team has a junior driver program in place, and that team is trying to poach a Carlos Sainz and Alex Albon for the long term. So where is a Colapinto or a Zach O'Sullivan supposed to go? If that is what they have, and that is the plan actually for them. It's the problem. One of the biggest things that comes with Red Bull is, and that is something actually that not many people know. Everyone thought that the entire Red Bull Junior program, it is basically a money burning exercise. But actually, I was having a chat with Josh Revell about this, and he said that it's not more than 30 to 40% of the overall budget that is actually funded by Red Bull or maybe other driver academies. It's only this much that gets funded. Rest is pretty much from the driver as well. So it's not that much of you can say a cash burning exercise. Now, when it comes to what to do with RB or what or how the Red Bull driver lineup should be, now I was pitched this question I think last week. So my again Alonso is an example, but I think Alonso will burn the house down. That is what he does almost every fucking team wherever he goes. I if I had the money, look, first of all, Checo is one of the highest paid drivers in Formula One right now. A lot of it comes from the Mexican sponsor, but still it is. If I'm getting rid of Checo and I have a decent wad of cash with me, and Red Bull is trying to be aggressive at this stage, there are a few steps that I would take. First of all, I'll call Nico Hulkenberg, tell him that okay, the Audi project looks fucked up, just get rid of it, sign him, buy him out of that contract, put him there for 2025 and 2026. These are the 2 years. Let him do what he can because it won't be as bad as Checo, to be honest. And these regulations are more in line with him, especially with the minimum driver weight actually reaching 82 kgs. That is one thing that I would do. I'll replace Checo with the Hulkenberg. Then it comes to the RB team. Now Yuki will be there until 2025 because of the Honda thing. That is the only reason why RB has Red Bull has stuck with him. The reason why they've not promoted Yuki to a senior team is again that's inside information. Whatever I've heard from the paddock, they don't think they can control an out of control Yuki Tsunoda. He gets angry a lot. There's a lot of temperamental issues, and when he starts shouting, it's too much. He's not someone who is going to stay calm when things are not going his way. And Red Bull already had a lot of headache with Gasly in 2019 when it comes to this, and apparently Gasly had a shouting match with Adrian Newey, and that led to him getting demoted after Spa.
Right, Aston Martin. So, both drivers did one stops. Interesting choice from them. Stroll was complaining that he had no straight line speed in the race, even though apparently he was fastest in the speed trap. Alonso got 9th in the end. Stroll was, 11th or 12th? I mean, not too bad at the end of the day.
It's not too bad. I think Alonso did a really good job this weekend. Q3 brought it home solidly in the points, if nothing spectacular. I think Stroll ran out of tire life at the end, and I think he was just frustrated with the fact that he wasn't as quick as he wanted. So he went on a rant about straight line speed, which the numbers suggest don't really add up with the reality of the speed trap numbers. So that is a good point. I think with Alonso, he was very impressive because he actually he extended that first stint on the mediums, and then on the high and on the hards, he managed his pace really well. So I think the thinking there was that Aston believed there might have been a safety car. So they thought when there wasn't, they don't lose anything by extending their initial stint and just staying on a one stop. So that's how they managed to score some points. They got the strategy right with the one stop. Stroll just struggled with tires. He just absolutely did not have the degree of tire life that others around him did, and I don't know if that was because of a setup issue. It's very possible, or maybe Lance himself just didn't drive as measured as he should have. Overall, I think their car is still well behind the top four, but Alonso brought it home in the points. But they need to keep working. The car's just not good enough right now to fight for anything beyond this. So good strategy, good effort, but the ultimate performance from the team is still massively lacking compared to investment and expectations.
I don't think there's much more to add to that.
Yeah, I think that's it. They're. I mean, both drivers are locked in for a while at that team as well. So there's not much. I mean, unless Alonso does eventually just get fed up and say, I'm not doing this anymore because this is going nowhere. But Stroll's going to be there for all eternity. So, yeah. Who's next? Aston Martin, not Aston Martin, Alpine. So Alpine, well, the news coming over the weekend, change of management, is that Bruno Famin is leaving, or Famin, however you meant to say it, over the summer. The latest link is that actually it might be the high-tech team principal Oliver Oakes who takes over as the new TP for Alpine. He himself used to be a Red Bull junior, so that interesting move for him. That's the main kind of point of gossip. So there's more. I mean, I made the analogy that if the Conservative Party was a Formula One team, it would be Alpine. But the race, Ocon was finished 9th with the disqualification. Gasly was not 9th. He was somewhere else. They had 12th.
He was 12th.
12th, okay. They ended up looking like Alfa Romeos because they had that Deadpool livery. And so the car came out red and black. And I was like, this is just an Alfa Romeo, which looked kind of cool. But yeah, at least it had paint on it compared to the other one. Yeah, I guess just not the okay weekend. Maybe just not the best. I don't know.
I think that livery is probably the most interesting thing that's happened with an Alpine that wasn't a crash this season.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I think when it comes to Alpine, okay, I'll just talk about the driver. I think Ocon stood out. I think Ocon and Alonso kind of stood out in the midfield this time around. The way in the conditions that they had to tackle through all those things. There's one thing that actually in the midfield we don't understand. The gap between Aston Martin, Alpine, RB, what are the Haas and so on. It's not much. It's basically a tenth or so. So whichever driver tends to, rise above everyone else, they've done a pretty good job. And I think Ocon kind of stood out in that front. Alonso did for Aston. Overall, Alpine is selling out. It's just going to be a slow and gradual process where Flavio tries to inflate the value as much as it can and reduce as much assets that he actually has to give over to a next team. What we are looking at is Renault finally admitting defeat, which they should have done at least 5 years ago, and basically leaving once again in the hands of Flavio Briatore, just like they did in 2009.
They probably should have admitted defeat in 2016, to be honest.
Yeah. Would have been better.
Here's the thing. I wish Renault had succeeded, and it's always nice to have a big manufacturer name. I don't even agree with the rebrand. Renault is a prestigious company in the history of motorsport and in the history of cars. I don't really understand why they have such low faith in the brand of that company. Okay, before we should probably wrap up Alpine quickly. So I just want to say 3 very quick things. First, terrific stuff by Ocon. I think he could have probably even finished 1 place higher if they had timed their strategy a bit better. Aston got the strategy right over Alpine, in my opinion. The second positive thing was they introduced an upgrade this weekend in Spa, and it worked. All the data showed that they took a step forward. So good momentum, at least on that front, going into the summer break. And what was really nice to see was Gasly let Ocon through, didn't he? At one point, he
No, he was overtaken. It was on the first.
yeah, but he was from what I
He
understand that
tried to
he
keep up,
tried to
but
defend,
yeah,
but he what I understood is he was let past by Gasly. That's what I
Basically,
heard from the
they made a
team
move without
afterwards.
crashing.
They made a move without crashing,
that's
and
mostly.
that's important because those two, that's a fear. Those two can come together anytime. So it was just good to see like a professional interaction between those two drivers. That's a very good thing for the rest of the season. And hopefully those two can work together because it's not a bad driver lineup, and I don't think Ocon was treated fairly earlier in the season. And I don't think it benefits either of them to be, kind of hurting themselves given where the team is. Like focus on the good things, focus on bringing this car home in the points. So lots of work still, but at least the upgrade was positive. So we'll see what they do when the summer break concludes. But good way to finish off the last race before the summer break, I suppose.
As well as Famine getting booted, obviously there is the latest news that they're trying to secure Mercedes power units in the future. So even though what's his face Famine is being exiled to Viry-sur-Châtillon, it looks like he won't have much of a job there either in the future. This is not a French team anymore. I mean, they're already half not French because their base is in Britain, and I'm guessing most of their staff are British. But now if they take on Mercedes engines, they just need to find a new identity. I don't know what they'll call it. Maybe they'll just finally call it Team Briatore or whatever. Like, I kind of can't believe the way he's just like waltzed back into the paddock as if nothing has happened. Like he gets away with everything in his life. He's dodged prison sentences. He's just always sucking in all the best engineers, and he almost got away with Singapore as well. And now I don't know how old he is, but he must be ancient as well because he's been around for
75, I think.
75, 76.
75. Yeah, because he's been in F1 on off for
Since the
35 years at least or something. And it's just nuts that he's come back and has taken over. So it's time for them to rebrand themselves again, maybe into something a bit more long term. I don't know what, but just not Renault. It's not Alpine. It's not French. It's gonna, if they have Mercedes engines, I don't know what they'll do with that, but something. Maybe Oaks will take it and they do just become high tech in that way, or Oaks F1 team. I don't know. But yeah, who's next? Williams. So this one we kind of fell back into bad habits a bit because there was another big gap between Albon and Sargent. Albon made Q2. Sargent qualified 19th. I mean, the gaps in quali were disgraceful. That he was 6/10 behind 18th, and then Joe was another 6/10 behind him. So that drop off at the back was enormous. In the rain, Albon, we saw him get past. He had a good start. He moved up in the first couple of laps because we saw him get passed by Max. And he was the cork in the bottle for a large part. In the middle stint, he was like leading the midfield with this big like 15-second gap to the front runners. And Sargent, he made an overtake on Hülkenberg near the end, so he didn't finish last.
Wow.
Well done, Sergeant. You have been promoted to. No, well, you haven't been promoted at all, have you? So he's still a terrible driver, and he needs to report to duty in another category, as far as I'm concerned.
He's going to IndyCar, right? Prema has
that seemed to be what they said would happen. And that would be a perfect fit for him. Why not? Because it's not. It's annoying because before this, the last couple of races, Silverstone and Hungary, by his standards, they were
nice.
They were reasonably good. But this one, it was just nothing again. And I was just annoyed because I thought he could probably make Q2 with their pace and quality in the wet, and then he gets knocked out in Q1. And it's like, okay, we know he's just not going to go anywhere in the race, and he didn't go anywhere. It was just annoying. But again, because it was one of those races where we had the front runners and the best of the rest, and no one breaking down except Joe, there was just no room to gain points other than through extremely inventive strategies.
I mean, he was so bad on the medium tire, though. I mean, his medium stint, he lost way too much time, and at the same time, he was trying to hold up people behind, which was helping Albon, but I don't think he did himself any favors at the end of the day. So, he just doesn't consistently show progress. Like, he shows a flash in the pan, like one session or like one part of a race, and then it just looks like he's a rookie, like his first race in F1. The next, something is not clicking with Logan Sargent in terms of his racing IQ and his ability to process information and then build on that incrementally. He's not at the level. He's just not good enough. He's just not good enough.
The biggest part is I don't think he's a bad driver. That's the shittiest part for me because I've seen him in Formula 2. I've seen him being teammates with Liam Lawson, and I'd say he was more impressive than Lawson in the same team, in the same car. But he, I think he outqualified him significantly. Even in the races, he was quite good. He won a couple of them. I think he won Silverstone, he won another race. It's just that either something has not clicked, either him working under the tutelage of James Vowles. Again, it might sound weird, but while James has been very, I think, more like a fatherly figure for Logan, the results have not been there. And somehow it does. Is he getting the right support? I hope he is, but results are not there. Is he getting everything a rookie needs to? Who knows? We still don't know that yet. And again, maybe Williams is not a place for it. Ideally, he should be beating Albon at least twice or thrice, or maybe more than that in a 10 race period. I don't think he beats him even once, and that's Albon is good, but he's not a Max Verstappen that you cannot beat him. Yeah, I think we are looking both Joe and Logan. We are looking at the last few races of their F1 career. We might not hear about them anymore in Formula One, at least after this season.
Yeah, I mean, good riddance. I don't really agree with you that Logan. Again, this is Formula One. This is the best drivers in the world. This isn't like just a good driver, and it doesn't really matter like what happens in the juniors, in my opinion, because so many things determine if you succeed in F1. Frentzen and Michael Schumacher were similar in sports cars. You know, it doesn't mean that because he was good in a junior category that he can handle the pressure of the premier motorsport class in the world. And we all agree, like, fine, maybe things could have been different, but he just hasn't. He does not deserve to continue in Formula
2 years
One.
now, and it's been more than
Yeah,
enough.
he's terrible. So we should probably
almost no improvement in 2 years. That's the
Yeah,
problem.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was
Even
a thing.
honestly, Latifi improved. To be honest, even Latifi would once in a while get the better of George. I haven't seen Logan do that either.
Latifi improved, and then ground effects came in like a wrecking ball, and he started triggering safety cars every other race. But yeah, there was a thing. There was a claim by a journalist that him and James are not on speaking terms anymore, and they've both shut that down.
No.
Yeah.
It wasn't a journalist. It was
Marcus
Marcus Ericsson.
Oh, it was Ericsson. It was yeah. It was some. Was it actually Ericsson himself? I thought it was part of Ericsson's media team.
No. Ericsson said that.
What would Marcus Ericsson know about this? Like, is he besties with Logan? Like, do they? He's never driven for Williams. What would he? Why him?
Ericsson has a nasty history of like making these weird claims about other drivers, and then the drivers come out and say, "I've never spoken to this guy in my life," or like, "I don't really know this guy. I don't know how he would know this." So I'm not really sure like what on earth is going on with Ericsson. I don't know why he even said that.
I mean, he knows a thing or two about overstaying his welcome in Formula One teams, so you know.
Longbow finance.
He does, doesn't he?
Oh god. I think, and it is such an un-Swedish thing to do. I mean, having verbal jabs is something you don't expect the Swedes to do in any which way, but here we are.
Okay, so penultimate team is Haas. With them, we haven't had. Well, no, that was a couple of weeks ago that we saw that Behrman is signing for them. Maybe that's not becoming such a good idea because he's kind of been a train wreck since that announcement happened. Their race, I don't know what was going on with Hülkenberg. Very interesting strategy. He ended up finishing last somehow. Magnussen just did his thing in the midfield, but I don't really have much else to say on that front.
Yeah, I think the car didn't suit. The car just wasn't suited for, or maybe they didn't find the right setup because the car. Ideally, Haas has been great in the straight line and even in the fast speed section, it's done well. In Silverstone, it was just mind blowing. Something didn't click here, and we saw it in the results. Hulkenberg had zero pace. Magnussen tends to have zero pace in general, anyways. So that's where we were with them, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, come on, there's not a whole lot to add here on Haas. I think at the end of the day, Hulkenberg pitted way too early, right? So he tried to, force others, and he just forced himself, really. And then, I don't know, Magnussen tried to do that one stop, right? But he got passed by the cars that had fresher tires, in the later stages of the race. So, Hulkenberg was just like, he had a horrible race. So, I think this car is absolutely deficient at any low downforce circuit. They have a real weakness when it comes to low downforce circuits, and I think Magnussen probably had a better race than Hulkenberg in general. I think Kevin executed his strategy probably a little bit better. And Nico just had way too much degradation, which is odd because this season it's usually been the other way around quite consistently. But this car has some issues with low downforce tracks, and we saw it again this weekend. So work to be done as usual at Haas.
Gunter Steiner, he did the post-race interviews as well, so he's become like the Sam Ryder and Ryan Clark of Formula One media. He's just going to be stuck here forever and is never going to go away. But yeah, and then last, and by every means least, Sauber. So Joe, disgraceful in qualifying, just stupidly slow. The car dies almost immediately. There's not much to say. He was on the alternate strat, so maybe he could have made positions. I don't know. Bottas got in his one designated overtake of the season, but otherwise didn't do anything else. Yeah,
That's it.
they had good. Didn't he have a 1.9 second pit stop?
1.9 second pit stop.
Yeah, so
From
they're
90
matching-
seconds to 1.9 seconds. That's called improvement.
Yeah, so that's a factor of, I don't know, 45 or something down into
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean,
Sauber
by the way,
off the grid.
Yeah. What do you think is going to happen with Audi?
Well, they've lost Andrea Seidel. Didn't who's come back? It's Mattia Binotto. Binotto's back at Sauber. Well, maybe that's enough to make Sainz go there. Back with him again.
Make him go not anywhere near them.
Yeah, one of the two. That's kind of like because Seidel, he's been working in the background for the past 2 years trying to hoover up engineers and drivers, and now they just kicked him. And he was perfectly good at McLaren. There was nothing wrong with him there, I don't think. But I don't.
Audi. That's the whole thing.
I just don't know. I don't know. I don't know if we're going to get some kind of Braun GP situation where we have Honda doing nothing for 2 years and being useless, and suddenly Sauber have got the best car, and God forbid Bottas becomes champion in 26 or something.
Look, if Hulkenberg becomes champion, I don't mind.
Oh, I would take that. Yeah. If he can do it somehow without ever getting on the podium, if he just finishes in fourth place in every single race and get the championship.
I mean, the best thing would be not even securing a podium for around 12, 15 years in his career, and then boom, 2026 fast car gets his first podium,
16 years later. Yeah. I did in the past 5 races actually that Checo has scored 24 points. Hulkenberg has scored 16, which kind of gives you an idea of what's going on.
I would put Hulkenberg in. I mean, Hulkenberg has been, I think, probably the most unlucky driver in F1. I mean, considering Checo was his teammate and Checo is in Red Bull, you have to say that even some level of, if something went right for Hulkenberg and if the regulations in 2014 were not too anti-tall drivers or heavy drivers, maybe things would have been different for him. And
he complains the least as well about his loss in life. He just takes it on the fly.
He's a multi-millionaire, right? So
yeah.
But again, he was supposed to be the next Schumacher. It wasn't Vettel, by the way, at that time. Even he won the A1 GP title.
Yeah.
Michael was the one who actually awarded him the trophy, and apparently Michael was a huge fan of both of these guys. But yeah,
there's a lot of what ifs with Hulkenberg's career. He could have gone to Mercedes in 2013. I think he was rumored to go to Red Bull, but that might not be the thing.
Yeah,
there's a lot of rumors that he could have had.
Ferrari.
The thing is, people say he went up against Perez, but people are now forgetting that pre-2021 Perez is probably top 5 drivers on the grid most years. Maybe top 7 at a push.
No.
I think now everyone is beginning to question how fast was that pink Mercedes really? Like, was it like a 2012 Williams where it could have actually won the title if they'd had better drivers?
Well, it was an Mercedes.
I think Hulkenberg also showed it, right? His first or second qualifying, what was it? Where he just
did he get on the front row at Silverstone, and he hadn't raced for 6 months or something?
Yeah.
and missed practice as well. I don't know, something like
Yeah, he
that.
spent the entire race with his neck like this on his car because the neck was not trained for the G forces,
Yeah,
which is actually hilarious to watch on the onboards.
Yeah, I mean, I think Williams in 2012 should have won more races than they did. That was a great car.
Yeah.
That's for sure. So,
Yeah.
anyways, I just want to say that with teams like sorry, not Alfa Romeo, with Sauber, I want to just quickly bring it back to that. Um, it's a classic case of thinking that you can go the marketing route when the talent isn't there, thinking that can compensate for actual competence and driving ability, and it's just sometimes it doesn't work. I mean, I'm sure if I'm at Sauber right now, I'm demoralized. And people don't understand that all the money in the world doesn't always lead to success. It has to be a balance. And they went completely in the wrong direction. They only signed Joe because of his ties to China, the world's arguably the world's largest economy, at least tied with the United States in some people's eyes. So it failed. It backfired. I don't think this Bottas Joe experiment was better than Raikkonen and Giovinazzi, and I don't think Giovinazzi deserved to lose his seat to Joe at all. Joe is not F1 material. As Peter used to say, he does a few laps and then he retires for Bents. And it's just pathetic because this guy's also pretty cocky. Like he was telling Carlos Sainz to like hurry up with his decision. Like I don't know who this guy thinks he is. Carlos Sainz is not Alain Prost, but Carlos Sainz would be chosen over Guan Yu Zhou for the next 1,000 years if the teams had a choice. So it's just a dislikable team. None of the drivers have charisma. The team clearly chose a driver in that team for money reasons. There's just no reason for anyone to look at the car is ugly. I mean, this is easily the most forgettable and dislikable team in many ways on the grid. And Audi can't come soon enough. I'm sorry to say. It just can't come soon enough. This is painful to watch. Thank God Kimi retired in 2021. Good move.
I think it's not even dislikable because dislikable would be evoking an emotion. Sauber is just there. It's anonymous. I mean, every weekend after the race, I have to do the driver ratings. I have to literally go back to the classifications and see where Bottas or Joe were. You don't even focus on these drivers in the race because nothing, zero. There's nothing going on with these guys. It's actually, by the way, why Joe was signed. Apparently, again, Ralf Schumacher makes a few claims. It's very hard to understand if he's actually correct or not. So apparently, according to him, Audi made an accounting error, and which led to the team on the verge of bankruptcy. That's why they needed Joe's money to stay in 2024. Now, how true is that? I have zero idea. But apparently, that is why Joe is still in the team. But ideally, when Joe was in Formula 2, I find it hard to even rank him in the top five drivers on the grid, which he was actually part of. And he's just there because of the money. And honestly, I still have a few positive things to say about Sargent because I've seen some sparks of brilliance. I've not seen anything from Joe ever in his Formula One career or in Formula Two career as well. To be honest.
What I'll say is, Sauber have gone from being arguably one of the most likable teams on the grid to just like back in 2012, you had Perez and Kobayashi. Admittedly, the car was a bit ugly, but you had two wild card drivers who you never knew if they were going to get first or obviously not first, but you never knew if they were going to get in the points or bin it every single weekend. They had a good vibe around them, and then Manisha Kaltenborg came in, and Marcus Ericsson and Longbow Finance came in, ruined it. Got rid of two fantastic drivers in Felipe Nasr and Pascal Wehrlein. Then they got in Raikkonen, who, albeit not horrendous, he didn't care. He just didn't care at that point. Giovinazzi, again, not a bad driver, but I think that they needed something new. I think that what they went with Bottas and Joe wasn't the right kind of new, but they needed something new with them. And yeah, it's just gone from being a very likable kind of underdog midfielder to just like why are they there? Just average, just not really there. Well, I mean, I don't think Zhou has been completely just bad and not really like he qualified fifth one year at Hungary, didn't he, in 2022 or
last
three
season. Last
last
season.
season. That's
And
probably it
fucked
though.
it off
Like,
on the first lap.
yeah,
Crashed both Alpines out.
but I mean, so he's had one good moment in his career. Maybe not zero, but just one.
Qatar was good, but then Bottas got in the points as well, so clearly the car was just working for once.
Yeah.
And I think last year Spain, he was battling with Tsunoda for points, and that was doing all right. So
Yeah.
there's been like 3 moments at the most that have been acceptable.
I think it's just a travesty that a Mick Schumacher got a couple of years in Formula One in basically a toxic team like Haas, led by Gunther Steiner. And you had Joe for as long as he's been in the team in Formula One. And even to an extent, Giovinazzi, because Antonio is good. I'd say Mick was a better talent and never got the opportunity to show it completely.
Yeah, I mean, look, on that point, I'll get to that. I'll be really quick here. I think one positive for Sauber this weekend was they think they could have finished a few places higher than, well, they finished 15th after disqualification of Russell, but they feel like they could have been even higher than that. They brought an upgrade for Bottas's car that seemed to work, but for whatever reason, it didn't work quite well enough. They're still not regular contender for the points, regular contender in that sense. Pivoting to your Mick Schumacher comment, I think everyone can see Mick is not Michael, but he definitely was not given I don't want to say he wasn't given a fair chance. He was not really treated with a lot of respect as a young driver, because I found some of Gunther Steiner's comments to be pretty harsh. And I don't think Mick is that special at all. Like, I don't think this guy will ever be a world champion or even close. However, you remember Gunther Steiner just came out like publicly lambasting Mick in that second season for like crashing too many times and saying like, I just don't see like the potential there. I thought to myself, like, wow, this guy is really personal. Like, okay, Mick didn't perform like Michael. Mick didn't even perform like Ralph. But look at the car you gave him. Look at the environment that you're bringing him into. I mean, like, why are you humiliating a driver because he crashed, one time? It wasn't one time. He crashed many times, but he crashed and you choose to, kind of like really brutally criticize him in the media. I don't think that was professional, like Gunther at all, And I always raised the question back then, did something happen between Mick and Gunther behind the scenes? Because I've seen Gunther Steiner's drivers do some idiotic things, Grosjean, Magnussen, and I've seen Gunther post race and after sometimes be much more complimentary than he was to Mick. Granted, Gunther, I think, was a very unprofessional team boss and made everything about himself, but maybe Mick does deserve a chance at another team with a more professional team boss, but let's be real, I don't think Mick is ever going to be
in Formula One.
Like a world. Yeah, no, I think he could be. Yeah, in Formula One, I don't think he's ever going to be like a multiple race winner, world champion type driver.
Yeah.
But maybe he does deserve that second chance.
Well, in conclusion, everyone except Max and Lewis sucks at the moment. Seems to be the vibe. Let's do tops and flops. So for my tops,
What's that? What's tops and flops?
Isn't it called top? Oh, we do our best drivers and our worst drivers of the weekend. I guess you haven't had that yet when you've been with us. Your top 3 or bottom 3, something like that. So top 3, George, Lewis, and I guess Piastri is easy enough. But yeah.
I'll go next. George, Lewis, and Fernando Alonso. It was a tough call between Alonso and Ocon for that third. Alonso did a really good job. He was just super consistent. Gasly overshot his marks. I think there was more in qualifying as well. So, George, Lewis, and Fernando for me.
I think George was the best driver of the race. I'd probably go Piastri second because although he made that mistake, he made up for it by getting right up to the back of him, and he probably would have won if it had been one more lap or two more laps. And then go on, Lewis third. I'm not the biggest fan of him, but he did all right.
Yeah, I had George, Alonso, Ocon in that order. I don't have Lewis there because, well, I mean, he pretty much set the standard, right? He did not behave like a world champion, something he preached everyone at the start of the weekend when he actually started throwing his team under the bus. I don't like that thing. The way Alonso and Ocon kind of dragged their cars into Q3, I think they don't get the kind of recognition that they deserve. And George, well, he pulled pretty much, you can say, a rabbit out of the hat. So yeah, these are my top three.
For
enough.
flops, well, Checo, Lando, and Sauber.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be Logan Sargent, number one. What a horrible medium tire stint that was. Number two for me is going to be Sergio Perez. That was pitiful, as usual. And flop number three, actually, if I really have to think about it, Lando Norris. Like, you have the quickest, or we can debate, you have probably the quickest car. Yet again, you make an unnecessary mistake at the beginning of the race. Get it together, mate.
I'll say worst driver is Perez, just going backwards. Sargent was just nowhere, and then maybe Norris again, just underperforming. Needs to get his shit together, otherwise I'm going to call him Damon Hill for the rest of his career.
I mean, Damon had 20 wins, by the way. I think Lando will take that any day.
But will he take
Yeah,
losing 3 championships?
he'll take one at this stage, honestly. Yeah, so I think Checo is probably the worst driver that we've had. I think Sauber, and to an extent, I'll say, I think maybe Williams. The kind of conversation we've had around Williams and the kind of results that they've had, I think it's about time we start seeing something on the track. I'm just not seeing it. So I think Sauber, Williams are the teams that kind of disappointed me. Checo, if you're not, I mean, even if you're not getting a podium out of a front row start, then something's missing big time.
So yeah, with Belgium done, 4 weeks to go till Zandvoort, and let's see if Max can make it 4 in a row there. You've been listening to the DRS Train podcast. We're on YouTube and Spotify, and you can find us on Instagram and X at the DRS Train podcast. Make sure to tune in for our next episode. Stay safe, and we'll see you all next time.
Bye.